My mother-in-law didn't know I paid the $4,800 rent. She demanded I leave so my daughter and her husband could start a family. The next day I called movers, packed everything and left. Seeing me actually go, she panicked, realizing too late what she'd pushed for. The bank statement in my hands showed a balance of $847. David's paycheck stub, crumpled on our kitchen counter, revealed he'd earned $2,100 last month. Our rent alone was $4,800. The math didn't add up, and suddenly 13 years of my marriage started making perfect sense. I set the papers down carefully, my fingers trembling slightly as the reality washed over me. 4 years, I'd been living in a carefully constructed fantasy where David was the provider and I was just helping out with my part-time pharmacy job. But these numbers told a different story entirely. I was the one keeping us afloat, and somehow everyone in this family had convinced themselves otherwise. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Just yesterday, Erica had bragged to her bridge club about David's success, gesturing around our spacious downtown apartment with obvious pride. "My son works so hard to give his family a comfortable life," she'd announced while serving coffee in the expensive cups I'd bought during a holiday sale at the department store. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories about standing up for yourself. If you believe women deserve respect in their own homes, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. I walked to our living room and looked around with new eyes. The leather sectional where Erica spent her afternoons watching soap operas, purchased with my overtime pay after working 3 consecutive weekends. The dining table where we ate mostly silent dinners, bought with money from my evening shifts when David claimed he was working late. Even the coffee maker Erica used every morning came from my employee discount at the pharmacy where I'd picked up extra hours to cover our utilities. 13 years ago, standing at the altar in my simple white dress, I'd believed David's promises about acceptance and love. His voice had been so sincere when he held my hands and swore that my infertility wouldn't matter to anyone who truly cared about me. "My family will be your family," he'd whispered during our first dance, spinning me slowly while his mother watched from the head table with that peculiar smile I'd learned to recognize. But Erica's expression that wedding day should have warned me about what was coming. Her congratulations had been perfectly polite, but there was something calculating in her eyes, like she was already planning how to minimize my role in their lives. During the reception, she made sure every guest understood I was a replacement rather than a choice, describing David's first wife Sarah as the love of his life who gave us our precious Jessica. 10-year-old Jessica had been my biggest puzzle from the beginning. David insisted her silence around me was normal childhood adjustment, but I knew better. She'd chatter happily with her father and grandmother, then go completely quiet whenever I tried to join their conversations. When I offered to help with her homework or asked about her school friends, she'd give me polite one-word answers before finding an excuse to leave the room. The truth about Jessica's behavior became clear during her 5th grade spring play rehearsal. I'd volunteered to help with costume alterations, desperate to find some way to connect with my stepdaughter through something she enjoyed. While kneeling behind the costume rack in the school auditorium, pinning hems and adjusting sleeves, I overheard a conversation that explained everything. "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers," Erica was telling another parent near the stage, her voice carrying further than she probably intended. "They try so hard to force themselves into families where they don't belong. It's almost painful to watch sometimes." The other mother made a sympathetic murmur, encouraging Erica to continue. "My granddaughter has been through enough changes already. She doesn't need another mother figure confusing her about where her loyalties should lie. Children need consistency, not someone trying to replace their real parent." I kept my head down, pretending to focus on the costume work while my heart hammered against my ribs. When I finally looked up, Erica was staring directly at me with that same cold smile from our wedding reception. She'd known I was listening to every word. That evening, I confronted David about what I'd heard and Jessica's increasingly distant behavior toward me. He rubbed his temples like I was giving him a headache and sighed heavily. "Mom's just protective of Jessica. You have to understand, Sarah's death was traumatic for everyone involved. Mom stepped in immediately to help raise Jessica, and they developed this incredibly close bond. But what does that have to do with Jessica refusing to acknowledge my existence? These family dynamics are complicated. You can't force emotional connections. They have to develop naturally over time. Except time wasn't helping anything. If anything, Jessica's rejection was becoming more obvious and deliberate. She'd started calling me David's wife, instead of using my name, even in direct conversation. During family dinners, she'd ask her father to pass messages to me rather than speak to me directly, despite sitting just 3 feet away. The financial deception had begun innocently during David's career troubles 5 years into our marriage. His architecture firms struggled when the economy declined and construction projects were canceled throughout the city. His paychecks became irregular and significantly smaller, while our expenses remained the same. "This is just temporary," David kept reassuring me as I picked up additional shifts at the pharmacy. "The market will bounce back soon and things will return to normal." I didn't mind working longer hours initially. The pharmacy job gave me purpose and independence. Plus, I genuinely enjoyed helping customers with their medications and health questions. What bothered me was how quickly David and Erica seemed to forget about my increased contributions to our household finances. When neighbors complimented our apartment or new purchases, David would smile modestly and make vague comments about doing reasonably well in his career. Erica would beam with maternal pride and tell people how hard her son worked to provide security for his family. Neither of them mentioned the 45 hours per week I was spending at the pharmacy to make their comfortable lifestyle possible. My first major secret purchase was our dining room set. David had complained for months about our old table, claiming it looked cheap and embarrassed him when colleagues visited for dinner. I spent weeks researching furniture options and saved enough money to buy a beautiful solid wood table with 6 matching chairs. When the delivery truck arrived, David assumed his latest commission had been larger than expected. "This looks fantastic," he said, running his hand along the polished surface. "I'm really glad we could finally afford to upgrade our dining room." I didn't correct his assumption. It felt harmless to let him maintain his pride as the family provider while I quietly contributed to our shared happiness. But that small deception became a pattern that grew larger and more complex over time. The leather sectional sofa came from 3 weeks of overtime pay. The new washer and dryer set required a month of weekend shifts. The 65-inch television that Erica loved to brag about to her friends cost me 2 months of evening hours, but she credited David's recent promotion whenever anyone asked about it. Eventually, I was paying our entire $4,800 monthly rent without anyone's knowledge. When David's income dropped to almost nothing during his worst period, I quietly arranged with our landlord to handle the payments directly. I asked them to continue addressing statements to David to avoid uncomfortable questions about our financial arrangements. Living this elaborate lie became exhausting, but I convinced myself it was temporary and necessary for family harmony. I told myself these financial sacrifices would eventually pay off in family acceptance, but Erica had different plans for my future. The systematic destruction of my self-worth began with small exclusions that grew into calculated cruelty over the years that followed. The first major blow came during Jessica's sophomore parent-teacher conference. I'd requested the afternoon off from the pharmacy, something I rarely did since we needed every hour of my income. I even bought a new navy dress, wanting to look professional when meeting Jessica's teachers for the first time as her stepmother. I prepared a list of thoughtful questions about her academic progress and college preparation, genuinely excited to be included in this important aspect of her life. I was standing in our hallway with my purse in hand, keys ready, when Erica emerged from the kitchen wearing her best coat and carrying her leather handbag. "Where are you going?" she asked, looking genuinely confused. "To Jessica's parent-teacher conference. It starts at 3:30. Erica's expression shifted to something between pity and amusement. "Oh honey, you don't need to come. Jessica's family has always been just David and me for these things. We have our routine, and adding another person would just complicate the dynamic with her teachers." The words landed like physical blows. I watched through our front window as David helped his mother into the passenger seat of his car, neither of them looking back at me standing alone in the apartment I was paying for, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for an event I'd been excluded from at the last moment. That evening, when they returned full of stories about Jessica's excellent grades and her teacher's compliments, I asked David why he hadn't mentioned I was planning to attend. "I figured Mom had talked to you about it," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She's been handling Jessica's school stuff since she was little. It's just easier to keep things consistent." The kitchen became Erica's primary battlefield after Jessica moved out for college. 4 years she'd shared cooking duties, making elaborate meals and teaching Jessica family recipes I was never invited to learn. But once Jessica left, Erica announced she was tired of all that work, and cooking responsibilities fell entirely to me. Every evening became a performance where Erica would sit at our dining table, the one I'd purchased, and critique my efforts with theatrical disgust. She'd cut into my chicken with exaggerated sawing motions, declaring it drier than cardboard, before pushing her plate away dramatically. When I made rice, she'd take a single bite and announce she'd never tasted such flavorless grain in her entire life. The cruelest part was her reaction when I asked for help. I found her old recipe box one afternoon and tried to recreate Jessica's favorite pot roast, following every instruction precisely. When Erica tasted it, she shook her head sadly. "This isn't even close to how it's supposed to taste. You're doing everything wrong. Could you show me the right way? I'd love to learn." Some people just don't have natural cooking instincts. You can't teach what isn't there. She'd watch me struggle in the kitchen every night, offering criticism but never assistance, turning meal preparation into daily proof of my inadequacy. When David complimented my cooking, she'd interrupt with comments like, "Well, it's edible, I suppose." Cleaning became another source of constant humiliation. Erica appointed herself supervisor of my housekeeping, conducting daily inspections with military precision. She'd run her finger along baseboards I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees, declaring them dusty. She'd unfold laundry I'd spent an hour organizing, refolding towels with sharp, angry movements while sighing dramatically. "Your mother clearly didn't teach you proper housekeeping," became her favorite insult, perfectly crafted to attack both my abilities and my deceased mother's memory simultaneously. I'd watch her redo work I'd already completed, her message clear: nothing I did would ever meet her standards. She'd inspect the bathroom after I cleaned it, finding imaginary spots on mirrors I'd polished until they gleamed. She'd reorganize kitchen cabinets I'd arranged carefully, claiming my system made no sense. When our refrigerator broke down on a sweltering summer morning, I didn't hesitate to buy a replacement. We needed to preserve our food, and I knew David's irregular income couldn't handle such a large unexpected expense. I researched models, compared prices, and arranged delivery for the next day. Erica was waiting when the appliance store truck arrived. She directed the delivery men like she'd orchestrated the entire purchase, discussing features and warranty details as if she'd chosen every specification. That afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with her sister. "David surprised us with a beautiful new refrigerator yesterday. Stainless steel with all the modern features. He works so hard to provide nice things for his family." The pattern repeated with every purchase I made. New curtains became David's thoughtful home improvement. A replacement vacuum cleaner became his practical gift to make housework easier. Even small items like new dish towels or coffee mugs were credited to his generosity and good taste. I was funding my own invisibility, buying comfort and convenience that others received credit for while I remained unacknowledged. David's behavior changed gradually but noticeably during this period. He began coming home later each evening, claiming increased work pressure and important client meetings. Our conversations became purely functional, discussions about bill due dates, household repairs, and schedule coordination. The emotional intimacy we'd once shared disappeared completely. When I tried to talk about Erica's treatment of me, his responses became predictable and dismissive. "Mom's been through a lot with Dad's death and Jessica moving away. She's just adjusting to changes. It's been 13 years, David. How much adjustment time does she need?" He'd sigh heavily like I was being unreasonably demanding. Some people process grief differently. You need to be more patient and understanding. Our bedroom became a place of polite distance. David would come home exhausted, claiming work stress, and fall asleep immediately after dinner. Weekend conversations focused on practical matters, grocery lists, home maintenance, social obligations we'd attend separately since Erica preferred family events to remain traditional. The most painful realization was understanding that David genuinely didn't see what was happening. He'd grown up with Erica's manipulation and considered her behavior normal family dynamics. When she criticized my cooking in front of him, he'd nod sympathetically like her complaints were reasonable feedback. When she excluded me from family decisions, he'd explain it as protecting me from unnecessary stress. I began to feel like a paying guest in my own home, tolerated but not welcomed, useful but not valued. Every morning I'd wake up in our bed, look around our apartment filled with furniture I'd bought, and wonder how I'd become so invisible in my own life. The systematic nature of Erica's campaign became clear over time. She wasn't randomly cruel, she was methodically destroying my confidence and place in the family structure. Every criticism, every exclusion, every credit stolen for my contributions was part of a larger strategy to prove I didn't belong. And the most devastating part was how well it was working. I was drowning in my own invisibility when Jessica's phone call changed everything. The sound of our landline ringing at 7 in the morning cut through the usual silence of our apartment, where David and I had been moving around each other like polite strangers for months. Grandma Erica. Jessica's voice bubbled through the speakerphone, breathless with excitement. Gregory and I have news. I watched Erica's face transform in real time. The perpetual tension lines around her eyes smoothed out, and her mouth opened in genuine surprise and delight. When Jessica announced her pregnancy, Erica actually screamed, a sound of pure joy I'd never heard from her before. "My first real grandchild," she exclaimed, pressing her hands to her chest. "Oh Jessica, this is the most wonderful news. How far along? When are you due? Are you feeling well? Have you seen a doctor yet?" The words "first real grandchild" stung, but I pushed the feeling aside as I watched this woman who'd made my life miserable suddenly glow with happiness. Her transformation was so complete it was startling. Within minutes she was pacing our living room, making mental lists and planning out loud. "We'll need to convert your old room into a nursery, of course. And baby-proofing. Everything will need baby-proofing. Oh, the shopping we have to do. Cribs, car seats, clothes, toys. I can't believe I'm going to be a grandmother." For the first time in years, Erica seemed genuinely happy, and despite everything she'd put me through, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this pregnancy would soften her heart. Maybe becoming a grandmother would help her see me as family instead of an intruder. "This is so exciting," I said carefully, testing the waters. "I'd love to help with preparations however I can." Erica glanced at me briefly, her joy dimming just slightly, but she nodded. "There will be plenty to organize." The shopping spree began the very next day. Erica appeared at breakfast with magazines, catalogs, and printed pages from baby websites spread across our dining table. She'd been awake since 5 in the morning, researching everything from organic cotton onesies to state-of-the-art baby monitors. "We need to get the essentials ordered right away," she announced, circling items with red pen. "The good stuff sells out quickly, and I refuse to let my grandchild settle for second-rate products." I watched our bank account drain with alarming speed over the following weeks. Every day brought new packages: a deluxe stroller system for $800, an organic mattress for $400, designer baby clothes that cost more per outfit than I spent on myself in a month. Erica justified each purchase as absolutely necessary for the baby's health and development. When I gently suggested that Jessica and Gregory might want to choose some items themselves, especially big purchases like cribs and car seats, Erica's response was swift and cutting. "You wouldn't understand the joy of preparing for your own grandchild," she said, not looking up from her latest catalog. "Some women never get to experience this feeling. This is what grandmothers do: we prepare, we provide, we make sure everything is perfect." The implication was clear. I wasn't really going to be this baby's grandmother, so my opinion didn't matter. But despite the sting of her words, I found myself getting caught up in the excitement anyway. After years of feeling useless in this family, here was finally something I could contribute to meaningfully. I volunteered to help prepare Jessica's old bedroom, spending my days off from the pharmacy cleaning out closets and researching baby-safe paint options. I bought books about child development and safety, highlighting important sections and leaving them strategically around the apartment where Erica might notice my efforts. In the evenings, I started knitting a baby blanket soft yellow yarn since we didn't know the gender yet. I'd work on it after dinner while watching television with David and Erica, imagining holiday gatherings where I'd finally have a role to play. I pictured myself as the step-grandmother who taught this child to ride a bike or helped with homework. Maybe this baby would be the bridge that finally connected me to this family. "That's lovely work," David said one evening, noticing my knitting project. "The baby will treasure that." Even Erica nodded approvingly. Yellow is practical. And handmade gifts are always special. For a few weeks, I allowed myself to believe that everything was changing. Erica included me in discussions about nursery themes and baby gear. She asked my opinion about which high chair offered the best safety features. When packages arrived, she'd show me each item and explain why she'd chosen it. But the financial reality became impossible to ignore. Our savings account, which I'd carefully built up through extra pharmacy shifts and careful budgeting, was disappearing at an alarming rate. We'd gone from having a comfortable emergency fund to owing money on 3 different credit cards. When I finally worked up the courage to address our spending, David's reaction revealed how little he understood about our actual financial situation. "Are you suggesting my earnings aren't adequate to support my family?" he asked, his voice tight with wounded pride. "I'm not criticizing your income. I'm saying we're spending more than we're bringing in, regardless of who earns what. Mom is excited about her first grandchild. She wants to provide the best for Jessica's baby. Isn't that what families do for each other?" I stared at him, realizing he genuinely believed his mother's shopping spree was being funded by his architecture work. He had no idea that every baby purchase was coming from my pharmacy paychecks, just like everything else in our household. The delusion was so complete that pointing out the truth would destroy what little self-respect he had left. "I just think we should set some limits," I said carefully. "Limits on my mother's joy? On preparing for my grandchild." The conversation ended there, but the damage was done. I could see the resentment in David's eyes, the feeling that I was being stingy about family priorities. He started coming home even later, avoiding discussions about money entirely. The perfect storm arrived 2 months before Jessica's due date when she called crying about Gregory's job loss. The manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 3 years was closing, and they were facing unemployment with a baby on the way. "I don't know what we're going to do," Jessica sobbed over the phone. "Our lease is up next month and we can't afford to renew it without Gregory's salary. We're going to be homeless with a newborn." My heart broke for them. Despite Jessica's coldness toward me over the years, she was still a young woman facing a terrifying situation. I immediately started thinking about practical solutions. Maybe we could help them find an affordable apartment nearby, contribute to a security deposit, or help with their first few months of expenses. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Erica said into the phone, her voice soothing and confident. "Grandma will figure something out. Family takes care of family." After Jessica hung up, Erica sat quietly at our kitchen table, her expression thoughtful and calculating. I could practically see the wheels turning in her mind as she worked through different scenarios. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She looked at me with that familiar cold smile, and suddenly I knew that whatever solution she was developing wouldn't include my comfort or well-being. "I'm thinking about what's best for Jessica and my grandchild," she said simply. "Sometimes that requires making difficult decisions about priorities." The way she said priorities made my stomach clench with sudden anxiety. After years of systematic humiliation, I recognized that tone. Erica was planning something, and I had a sinking feeling that I was about to discover exactly how expendable she considered me to be. The anxiety from Erica's calculating expression lingered through the night, making sleep impossible. I tossed and turned, replaying her words about difficult decisions, and wondering what solution she was planning for Jessica's housing crisis. When Tuesday morning arrived, I dragged myself to the kitchen expecting another day of subtle hostility and invisible existence. Instead, Erica was sitting at our dining table with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly in front of her like she was conducting a business meeting. She wasn't reading the newspaper or checking her phone like usual. She was simply waiting, and something about her stillness made my skin crawl. "We need to talk," she said before I could even reach for my coffee mug. The tone was different from anything I'd heard from her before. Not the usual passive-aggressive criticism or theatrical disappointment, but something cold and final. My hand trembled slightly as I poured coffee from the machine I'd bought 6 months ago, the one she'd claimed credit for when her bridge club friends visited. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Erica's expression was unlike anything I'd seen in 13 years of living with her. Her eyes held a strange satisfaction, like she'd been planning this conversation for years and was finally ready to execute her plan. The morning light from our kitchen window cast sharp shadows across her face, making her look almost predatory. "Since Jessica and Gregory need to start their family properly," she began, her voice steady and businesslike, You need to leave. The words landed like physical blows. I set my coffee mug down carefully, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Leave? What do you mean leave? I mean pack your belongings and vacate this apartment. Tomorrow. The casual way she delivered this ultimatum was breathtaking. She might have been discussing the weather or asking me to pick up groceries. But her eyes were sharp and focused, watching my reaction with obvious pleasure. This is my home too, Erica. David and I are married. Jessica needs stability for her child. Gregory needs work, and David can help him find opportunities in the architecture field. They need space to build their new life without complications. Complications. Her smile was thin and cruel. You've been redundant in this family for years. We don't need another mother figure confusing things. Jessica has me for guidance, and the baby will have its real grandmother. Your presence just creates unnecessary tension. I stared at her, my brain refusing to accept what I was hearing. You can't just kick me out of my own home. Can't I? She leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed now that her cards were on the table. You've been living here as David's wife, but that arrangement isn't working for our family's future needs. Tomorrow is your deadline. 24 hours. She was giving me 24 hours to abandon the life I'd spent 13 years building, the apartment I'd been paying for, the furniture I'd bought piece by piece with my pharmacy wages. Where exactly do you expect me to go? That's not really my concern. You're a grown woman with a job. I'm sure you'll figure something out. The cruelty in her voice was staggering, but she wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly and I could see years of stored venom finally being released. You barren failure, she continued, her voice gaining strength from my shocked silence. You were allowed to experience raising a child for 13 years. Be grateful for that much. Each word was a carefully aimed dagger. She attacked my infertility, my inability to give David biological children, my very worth as a woman. The clinical way she dissected my failures told me this speech had been rehearsed, probably multiple times. Jessica never needed you. David never needed you. You've been playing house with someone else's family, pretending you belonged here. Well, the game is over. I felt my legs give out slightly and I gripped the kitchen counter for support. David loves me. We've been married for 13 years. Erica's laugh was genuinely delighted, like I'd just told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. Love? Is that what you call it when your husband comes home later and later every night? When he stops talking to you about anything meaningful? When he finds comfort elsewhere? The room tilted around me. What are you talking about? It seems like David is tired of you too. Maybe he's getting along well with a new girlfriend by now. She delivered this information with surgical precision, watching my face crumble as the implications sank in. The casual way she mentioned David's affair told me she'd known about it for months, possibly years. All those late nights, all those mysterious work emergencies, all those times he'd avoided my calls during the day. You knew, I whispered. Of course I knew. Amanda is lovely, by the way. Young, fertile, actually capable of giving David the family he deserves. They've been quite happy together. The betrayal was so complete, so overwhelming that I couldn't form words. David wasn't just cheating on me, he was building a whole new life while I paid for his current one. And Erica had been watching it all unfold, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy me with the truth. Amanda doesn't know about your little financial arrangement, of course. David's been quite clever about maintaining his provider image with her. But once you're gone, that won't matter anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the counter. How long? How long what? How long has David been seeing her? Erica pretended to consider the question. Oh, about 8 months now. Right around the time you bought that lovely new television set that David claims he purchased for the family. 8 months. While I'd been working extra shifts to pay for our household expenses, while I'd been knitting baby blankets and dreaming about finally finding my place in this family, my husband had been building a relationship with another woman. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed David's office number. The receptionist's voice was apologetic but clear. I'm sorry, but Mr. Martinez is out of the office today. He's taken several personal days this week. Personal days he hadn't mentioned to me. I tried his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Voicemail. David, it's me. Please call me back. Something's happened and I really need to talk to you. I left 3 more messages, my voice getting more desperate with each one. Erica watched this pathetic display with obvious satisfaction, like she was enjoying a particularly good television show. "He's probably with Amanda right now," she said conversationally. "They spend a lot of time together at that little hotel downtown. The Marriott, I believe." I slumped into a chair at the dining table I'd bought with my overtime pay, surrounded by baby supplies I'd helped purchase, in an apartment I'd been secretly funding for years. Everything I'd thought was real, my marriage, my family, my home, had been an elaborate lie. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why what? Why tell me all this now? Why not just let David ask for a divorce?" Erica's smile was triumphant. "Because Jessica needs this apartment, and David doesn't have the spine to handle difficult conversations. Besides, this way is more efficient. You disappear, Jessica and Gregory move in, and everyone gets what they actually want. Everyone except me. I was completely alone, sitting in my own kitchen, being evicted from my own life by a woman who'd spent 13 years systematically destroying my confidence and self-worth. And she was enjoying every second of my devastation. I sat in my kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at my phone and waiting for David to call back. The silence was deafening, broken only by Erica's occasional satisfied sighs as she flipped through baby catalogs like nothing earth-shattering had just happened. The walls of our apartment, my apartment, seemed to be closing in on me. "I'm going for a walk," I announced, grabbing my purse before Erica could respond with another cruel comment. The late afternoon air felt sharp against my face as I wandered aimlessly through downtown streets. My legs carried me without conscious direction, past familiar shops and restaurants that held memories of a life I now realized had been built on lies. I found myself standing outside Murphy's Tavern, a cozy Irish pub where David and I used to have dinner dates during our first year in this neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me, seeking comfort in a place that reminded me of happier times with the man who was apparently building a new life behind my back. But something drew me inside anyway, maybe the need for a familiar space where I could think clearly. The interior was dimly lit and nearly empty at this time of day. I slid into a booth near the window and ordered coffee from a young waitress who looked vaguely familiar. When she returned with my drink, she hesitated beside my table. "Mrs. Martinez? You probably don't remember me, but I'm Emma. I used to work at the pharmacy down the street before I started here." I looked up at her fresh face and kind eyes, grateful for any human connection that wasn't tainted by years of manipulation and lies. "Of course. Emma, how are you? I wondered what happened when you left the pharmacy so suddenly." Her expression shifted to something between concern and nervousness. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to tell you something. I've been wanting to reach out, but I wasn't sure if I should get involved." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What is it?" Emma glanced around the nearly empty tavern, then slid into the booth across from me. "Your husband comes in here regularly. With a woman. Not you." The words confirmed what I already knew, but hearing them from a witness made everything feel more real and devastating. "How regularly?" "2, sometimes 3 times a week. Always the same booth in the back corner. They're very..." She paused, choosing her words carefully, affectionate with each other. I stared into my coffee cup, processing this information. "How long has this been going on?" "I started working here about 8 months ago, and they were already regulars then." 8 months. Exactly the timeline Erica had mentioned. While I'd been working extra shifts to pay for our household expenses and knitting baby blankets in the evenings, David had been maintaining a relationship with another woman just 6 blocks from our apartment. Emma reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. "I took some pictures. I know it's not really my business, but you've always been so kind to me, and it felt wrong not to say anything." She showed me her phone screen, and I found myself staring at images that shattered the last remnants of my marriage. David and a petite blonde woman entering the downtown Marriott Hotel, his arm around her waist in a possessive way he hadn't touched me in years. Another photo showed them in the tavern booth, leaning close together over drinks, her hand resting on his cheek. As I stared at these images, something strange happened. The crushing heartbreak I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt something harder and more focused crystallizing in my chest, a cold determination I'd never experienced before. "Emma, could you send these to my phone?" "Of course." "And Mrs. Martinez? I'm really sorry. You deserve so much better than this." Walking home with Emma's evidence in my phone, My mind started working in ways it never had before. For 13 years I'd been the accommodating wife, the invisible provider, the woman who absorbed abuse and accepted crumbs. But Erica's ultimatum and David's betrayal had freed me from any obligation to protect their feelings or maintain their illusions. If they wanted me gone, I would give them exactly what they asked for. But I wouldn't disappear quietly into the night like some discarded piece of furniture. I would take everything that was truly mine, which, as it turned out, was everything that made their comfortable life possible. Back in our apartment, Erica was on the phone with Jessica, excitedly discussing nursery paint colors. She barely glanced at me when I walked past, too absorbed in her grandmother fantasies to notice the change in my expression. That night, after David failed to come home or return any of my calls, I made the phone call that would change everything. Premier Moving Services, this is Jake. I need to schedule a complete household move for tomorrow morning, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day. Tomorrow? That's pretty short notice, ma'am. What size home are we talking about? 3-bedroom apartment. I need everything moved except for 1-bedroom set and some baby supplies. Everything else? Everything. Furniture, appliances, personal belongings. I want the apartment completely cleared of my possessions by tomorrow afternoon. As I scheduled movers and arranged for temporary storage, I felt a strange calm settling over me. If Erica wanted to eliminate me from the family equation, she was about to learn exactly what my elimination would cost them. I spent the entire night documenting 13 years of financial contributions. Bank statements, credit card records, store receipts I'd saved for warranty purposes. Everything painted the same picture. The leather sectional sofa where Erica criticized my cooking every evening? Purchased with my overtime pay from the pharmacy. The 65-inch television she bragged about to her friends? 3 months of my weekend shifts. The dining set where we'd eaten mostly silent dinners? My employee discount and careful saving. Item by item, room by room, I documented the truth about who had actually been providing for this family. The washer and dryer that cleaned their clothes, the dishwasher that handled their dishes, the coffee maker that brewed their morning coffee, the bed where David and I had slept, all of it purchased with money I'd earned while they lived under the delusion that David was the provider. Even the baby supplies scattered throughout the apartment had been bought with my credit cards, though Erica had claimed full credit for every thoughtful purchase. As I packed my personal belongings, clothes, books, photo albums, the jewelry box that still contained my wedding dress receipt, I felt lighter with each sealed box. 4 years, I'd been carrying the weight of this family's financial stability while receiving only criticism and exclusion in return. Tomorrow I would finally set that burden down. I left out only the essentials I'd need for the next few days, along with one outfit for tomorrow's grand finale. I wanted to look professional and composed when Erica discovered what my departure would actually cost them. By dawn I was ready. The movers would arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. Erica would wake up to discover that everything she'd taken for granted was about to disappear, just like the woman she'd spent 13 years trying to erase. I sat in my favorite chair, the one I'd bought during my first year of marriage, and watched the sunrise through windows I'd been paying to look through. After years of living as a ghost in my own home, I was about to become very visible indeed. The knock at our door came at exactly 8 a.m., just as I'd requested. I was dressed in my best navy suit, the one I wore to important pharmacy conferences, my hair pulled back professionally. I wanted to look composed and in control for what was about to unfold. "I'll get it," I called out before Erica could move from her spot at the kitchen table where she was eating the breakfast I'd prepared for the last time. 3 men in matching Premier Moving Services uniforms stood in our hallway with clipboards and confident expressions. The crew leader, a stocky man named Miguel, extended his hand. "Mrs. Martinez? We're here for the full household relocation." "Perfect timing. Please come in." I opened the door wide and gestured them inside. Behind me, I heard Erica's coffee cup clatter against her saucer. "What's going on?" she demanded, rising from her chair as the movers began surveying our living room with professional efficiency. "I'm taking everything I bought," I announced calmly, turning to face her. "Which, as it turns out, is everything except your old dresser and the baby supplies." Erica's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the movers began their systematic removal of our life. Miguel directed his team with quiet competence while I provided a detailed inventory of exactly what belonged to me. The sectional sofa goes to storage unit 47, I told them. Also the coffee table, end tables and all the lamps. Wait, you can't just take our furniture. Erica sputtered, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. It's not our furniture. It's my furniture. Purchased with my money from my job. I handed Miguel the receipt file I'd organized the night before. Everything's documented here. Purchase dates, payment methods, warranty information. Watching them wrap and remove the leather sectional where Erica had spent years criticizing my cooking felt surprisingly therapeutic. She stood frozen in the center of our living room as her comfortable world literally disappeared around her. The dining set too, I instructed as two movers approached the table where we'd eaten so many silent dinners. Table, chairs, and the matching sideboard. This is insane, Erica whispered, but I noticed she wasn't actually trying to stop them. Deep down she knew I was right. The kitchen proved especially satisfying. Out went the dishwasher I'd bought when our old one broke down. The coffee maker that brewed her morning ritual. The microwave she used to reheat leftovers while complaining about my fresh cooking. Even the refrigerator, the brand new stainless steel model she'd bragged about to her bridge club friends just 2 weeks ago. Wait, who's going to pay for all this? Erica stammered, gesturing frantically at the increasingly empty space. Her panic was immediate and complete as the reality of my departure hit her. For 13 years, she'd lived under the comfortable assumption that David was providing their lifestyle. Now she was watching that illusion crumble in real time. I mean, how will we afford to replace everything? How will we even eat without a refrigerator? That sounds like a problem for the people who'll be living here, I replied, checking items off my inventory list as the movers worked. But you can't just leave us with nothing. What about family loyalty? What about supporting each other through difficult times? I looked at her with the same cold smile she'd perfected over the years. Some people just aren't meant to be family members. You taught me that. Her frantic pleas continued as room after room was systematically emptied. The bedroom furniture, the washer and dryer, the television that had been the centerpiece of their evening entertainment, all of it disappeared into the moving truck while Erica watched in growing desperation. By 10 a.m., David's key was turning in the front door. He walked in with Jessica and Gregory, clearly expecting to find me cowering and ready to negotiate. Instead, they found a nearly empty apartment and 3 movers carrying out the last of my belongings. What the hell is happening here? David demanded, his voice cracking with shock. I'm leaving just like your mother requested. I'm taking my things with me. Jessica looked around the bare space with wide eyes. But where will we live? Where will we put the baby's things? That's an interesting question, I said, pulling out the rental agreement I'd retrieved from our files. The monthly rent for this apartment is $4,800. Due on the 1st of every month. Gregory's face went completely white as he processed the number. $4,800? Every month. That's impossible, Jessica said. Dad's been paying that this whole time? David's embarrassed silence spoke volumes. He stood in the middle of our empty living room, unable to meet anyone's eyes, finally exposed as the financial failure he'd been hiding behind my earnings. We can't afford $4,000 a month, Gregory said quietly. My unemployment benefits are only $1,200. Even if I found work immediately. Well then, I said, slinging my purse over my shoulder and heading toward the door, I guess you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Please direct any further communication through my lawyer. I was almost to the hallway when inspiration struck. I turned back to face David one last time. Oh, and David, I have some interesting photos of you and Amanda at the Marriott. Multiple occasions, very clear images. I'm sure your divorce attorney will find them fascinating evidence of marital misconduct. The look of absolute terror that crossed his face was worth 13 years of patient suffering. Behind him, Jessica gasped and Erica actually stumbled backward. You've been cheating? Jessica's voice was high and incredulous. While she was paying for everything. How did you? David started, then stopped, realizing any explanation would only make things worse. Emma at Murphy's Tavern is very observant, I said casually. And apparently she's been documenting your regular dates for months. I walked out while they were still processing this final revelation, leaving them standing in their empty apartment with the baby supplies as the only remaining furniture. The moving truck pulled away as I settled into my car, 13 years of accumulated possessions finally back under my control. The weeks that followed brought a series of satisfying updates. David agreed to the divorce settlement quickly once faced with photographic evidence of his affair. Jessica and Gregory, unable to afford the rent, had to move back to her cramped studio apartment with a baby on the way. Most deliciously, Amanda, David's precious girlfriend, wanted nothing to do with supporting his elderly mother or helping with his mounting alimony payments. Erica, who had spent years planning to discard me, suddenly found herself facing the very real possibility of assisted living placement. The family she'd prioritized over basic human decency was too broke and overwhelmed to provide the comfortable retirement she'd expected. My new apartment near the financial district was smaller but entirely mine. I returned to full-time work at the pharmacy, rediscovering the satisfaction of financial independence and professional respect. For the first time in 13 years, I was living for my own happiness instead of serving people who saw me as expendable. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about removing yourself from people who never deserved your generosity in the first place. I had finally stopped being invisible, and the view from my new life was absolutely beautiful. If this story of ultimate revenge had you cheering, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the movers started removing everything while Erica watched in horror, realizing she'd been living off my money all along. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Abigail Reynolds, 34, and my grandfather's lakeside cabin was my safe haven growing up. When he left it to me in his will 6 months ago, I never imagined finding my brother-in-law Jason moving his entire family in without my permission. I discovered them literally redecorating my living room while I was supposed to be away on business. The betrayal cut deeper because Jason had already hinted he felt entitled to my inheritance, but I never thought he'd go this far. Before I tell you how I walked in on them painting over my grandfather's hand-carved mantle, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if family drama is your thing. Trust me, this story has more twists than the lakeside road leading to my cabin. The cabin sits on Crystal Lake, a serene body of water tucked away in the mountains about 2 hours from the city. It's not particularly large or luxurious by modern standards, just 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious living area with a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch that gives you a 180-degree view of the water. But what it lacks in modern amenities, it makes up for in character and memories. My grandfather built most of it with his own hands in the 1970s. The support beams still bear his initials, and the floorboards in the main room creak in a pattern I could navigate blindfolded. Every summer from age 5 until college, I spent at least a month there with him after my parents divorced. He taught me to fish off the private dock, pointing out the spots where bass liked to hide beneath the lily pads. We'd sit for hours in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing thoughts that seemed to flow more easily there than anywhere else. At night, he'd take me stargazing on the small hill behind the cabin. "This is where magic happens, Abby," he'd say, pointing to the constellations and telling stories about each one. The Big Dipper was our favorite. He called it our celestial ladle, always serving up dreams and possibilities. When I got the call 6 months ago that he had passed peacefully in his sleep, I felt like someone had punched a hole through my chest. I was the only family member who visited him regularly in his nursing home those last 2 years. My sister Lauren came occasionally, usually when she needed money or favors, but mostly it was just him and me, looking through old photo albums and reminiscing about those summer days. The inheritance came as a surprise. I assumed the cabin would be sold to cover his medical expenses, but apparently, my grandfather had planned carefully. His will was specific. The cabin and the 5 acres surrounding it were to go to me, who understood its value beyond the material. There was a small trust to maintain the property taxes and upkeep as well. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the most meaningful gift I'd ever received. Lauren seemed fine with the arrangement at first. She and her husband Jason lived in a nice apartment in the city. They had 2 kids, Emma, 9, and Noah, 7, and Lauren worked as a part-time dental hygienist. Jason jumped between sales jobs, never quite finding his footing. He had an excuse for every failure. Bad management, office politics, the economy. Lauren always defended him, insisting he was just waiting for the right opportunity. My relationship with Jason had always been strained. He had a way of inserting himself into family matters that didn't concern him and often made comments about my divorce 2 years ago, suggesting I couldn't keep a man happy. I tolerated him for Lauren's sake, but there was always something about him that felt off, like he was calculating what he could get from every situation. I first noticed his unusual interest in the cabin during the reading of the will. While Lauren hugged me, Jason asked pointed questions about the property value and whether I planned to sell it. I made it clear I intended to keep it and perhaps even move there permanently someday, working remotely for my accounting firm. "Seems like a waste for just one person," he commented, a strange edge to his voice. A family could really use a place like that. I brushed it off, but the comment lingered uncomfortably. A month later, during a family dinner at my parents' house, Jason brought up the cabin again. "You know, Abby, your grandfather probably meant for that place to be shared by the whole family," he said between bites of pot roast. "Lauren has memories there too." "Very few, actually," Lauren corrected him. I was always more of a city girl. Abby was the one who bonded with Grandpa over fishing and nature stuff. Jason's jaw tightened. "Still, it's a valuable property. In this economy, families should look out for each other. Maybe we could work out some kind of timeshare arrangement." My mother changed the subject, sensing my discomfort, but I caught Jason staring at me throughout dinner with an expression I couldn't quite place. In retrospect, I should have recognized it as entitlement and resentment. After inheriting the cabin, I spent weekends there, slowly making it my own while preserving its character. I replaced the aging refrigerator, but kept my grandfather's collection of hand-carved wooden spoons displayed in the kitchen. I updated the plumbing, but preserved the river stone shower he had painstakingly assembled. Each change was thoughtful, a balance between practicality and preservation. I had plans to eventually renovate the small guest room into a home office, so I could work remotely more often. The city had been feeling increasingly claustrophobic since my divorce from Mark, and the cabin represented not just my past, but potentially my future, a place of healing and new beginnings. If only I had known how quickly Jason would try to steal that future from right under my nose. My accounting firm sent me to Chicago for what was supposed to be a 2-week audit of a major client. I left the cabin securely locked, asked my nearest neighbor, Mr. Peterson, to collect my mail, and headed off with no concerns. 5 days into my trip, I received a text from Mr. Peterson that struck me as odd. "Your family seems nice. Didn't know they'd be staying at the cabin while you're away." I called him immediately. "What family?" I asked, my stomach already nodding with suspicion. "Your sister's family, I think? Man said he was your brother-in-law. They arrived yesterday with a moving truck." I assumed you knew. I ended the call and immediately tried Lauren's cell. No answer. Then Jason's. Straight to voicemail. I called my parents, who seemed genuinely surprised. "Maybe they're just using it for a long weekend," my mother suggested, always looking for the charitable explanation. I knew better. A moving truck wasn't for a weekend trip. I told my supervisor there was a family emergency and booked the first flight home, arriving late the following evening. I rented a car at the airport and drove straight to the cabin, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I rounded the final curve of the lake road, my headlights swept across an unfamiliar truck in the driveway, Jason's new Ford F-150 that he'd been so proud of financing despite his questionable credit. Beside it sat a moving truck, just as Mr. Peterson had said. But what made my blood run cold was the pile of furniture on the front porch, furniture I didn't recognize, alongside some of my grandfather's pieces that had been moved outside, exposed to the elements. I parked and approached slowly, noticing lights on throughout the cabin. Through the windows, I could see movement, people walking around as if they owned the place. My place. I used my key to open the front door, half expecting it not to work, but it turned smoothly. The scene inside stopped me in my tracks. My living room had been rearranged. The couch faced a different direction, and an enormous television I'd never seen before dominated one wall. Toys littered the floor and the walls. The beautiful pine walls my grandfather had stained himself were partially painted an awful shade of blue. "Hello?" I called out, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. Lauren appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands and shock on her face. "Abby, you're supposed to be in Chicago. And you're supposed to not be in my cabin," I replied coldly. "What the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, Jason strolled in from the hallway, wearing sweatpants and looking completely at ease. He barely registered surprise at seeing me. "Oh hey, Abby. Didn't expect you back so soon." His tone was casual, as if he were a welcome guest I'd invited. "Obviously," I said. "Would you like to explain why you're here, why there's a moving truck outside, and why you're painting my walls?" Jason exchanged a look with Lauren before putting on what I can only describe as his salesman smile. "Look, we had a situation. My company went through some restructuring, and I'm between positions right now. The lease on our apartment was up, and this place was just sitting empty most of the time." "You were fired?" I interrupted, cutting through his euphemisms. His smile faltered. "That's not the point. The point is, we needed a place temporarily, and you have all this space going unused. We're family, Abby. Family helps family." "You didn't ask." I nearly shouted. "You broke into my home." "We didn't break in," Lauren interjected, looking uncomfortable. "We used the spare key from Mom's house." That explained it. My mother had a spare key for emergencies. I hadn't thought to ask for it back after inheriting the place. At that moment, Emma and Noah emerged from the bedrooms, pajama-clad and curious about the commotion. Emma ran to hug me while Noah hung back, clutching a video game controller. "And Abby, did you see my new room? Dad let me paint it purple," Emma said excitedly. "My new room." The words hit me like a slap. I looked to Lauren and Jason, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "The kids are already settled in," Jason said quietly, a calculated move using the children as shields. "Emma's enrolled in the local school. It's only been a few days, but they already love it here." "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, connecting the dots. "When exactly did you lose your job, Jason?" More uncomfortable glances between them. Finally, Lauren answered, "About 3 weeks ago. We gave notice on our apartment right after." Jason thought. I thought, he interrupted, stepping forward, that instead of paying insane rent in the city, we could live here and contribute to the taxes and maintenance. It's a win-win. The place gets used, and we save money until I land my next position. "Which you didn't think to discuss with me, the owner of this property?" I was struggling to keep my voice level. "We tried calling," Lauren said weakly. "Bullshit," I replied. "My phone works internationally. There's not a single missed call from either of you." The children were watching now, confused by the adult tension. Jason saw my attention shift to them and seized the opportunity. "Look, the kids are tired, and this is a lot to process," he said reasonably. "Why don't you stay in the guest room tonight, and we can discuss this properly in the morning. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone." The audacity of him offering me a room in my own cabin made my vision blur with rage. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't a negotiation. This is my property. You had no right to move in here, make changes, or enroll your children in school using this address. I want you all out by tomorrow afternoon." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Abby, please. We have nowhere else to go right now. Jason's severance won't cover a security deposit on a new place until his next job comes through." "Not my problem," I said, hating how cold I sounded, but knowing I needed to stand firm. "You should have thought of that before essentially breaking into my home and redecorating without permission. You're really going to put your own sister and her kids out on the street?" Jason asked loudly, his tone shifting to indignant. "All because you want to keep this big place to yourself? That's incredibly selfish, Abby, even for you." And there it was. The manipulation tactic I'd seen him use on Lauren countless times, now directed at me. Make the reasonable person feel unreasonable. Turn the victim into the villain. "I'm leaving for tonight," I said, ignoring his bait. "I'll be back tomorrow at noon. If you're not packed and ready to leave, I'll call the sheriff. I turned and walked out, even as Lauren called after me and the children looked on in confusion. In my car, I finally let the tears come. Not just from anger, but from the violation of the one place that had always been my sanctuary. The one place that connected me to my grandfather. And now Jason had tainted it with his entitlement. I checked into a motel by the highway, too exhausted and upset to drive back to the city. As I lay awake on the lumpy mattress, I realized this was just the beginning of what would become the most challenging family conflict of my life. After a nearly sleepless night at the roadside motel, I drove to a local diner for coffee and to clear my head. I needed to approach this rationally, despite the emotional nature of the situation. Part of me felt guilty for threatening to throw my sister and her children out, but another part, the part that remembered my grandfather's face when he showed me the deed to the cabin on my 21st birthday, was resolute. "One day this will be yours, Abby," he'd said. "Not because you're my only grandchild who cares about it, but because you're the only one who sees it as more than property." By 11:30 a.m., I drafted a compromise in my mind. I would give them 2 weeks to find alternative arrangements. I'd even offer to help with a security deposit on a new apartment if necessary. That seemed reasonable while still establishing clear boundaries. I pulled into the cabin's driveway at precisely noon, noticing immediately that the moving truck was gone. For a moment, I felt relieved, thinking they had taken my deadline seriously and left. But Jason's truck was still there, and so was Lauren's sedan. I approached the front door and inserted my key. It didn't turn. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling it slightly as sometimes the lock stuck in humid weather. Nothing. With dawning comprehension, I realized they had changed the locks. I knocked loudly, then pounded when there was no immediate answer. Finally, Lauren opened the door, looking tired and nervous. "Why doesn't my key work?" I demanded without preamble. She stepped aside to let me in, avoiding my eyes. "Jason thought it would be safer to change the locks. Since, you were so upset yesterday." "Safer? It's my cabin, Lauren. You changed the locks to MY property to keep me out." Jason appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, looking irritatingly calm. "Abby, let's talk reasonably. We've decided we'd like to stay through the summer at least. The kids love it here, and it makes financial sense for everyone." I stared at him incredulously. "Did you not hear me yesterday? This isn't your decision to make. And where's all your stuff?" "The moving truck is gone." "We unpacked," he said simply. "Everything's put away." I walked further into the cabin, surveying the damage. They had indeed made themselves completely at home. The living room was rearranged around their enormous television. The kitchen now held unfamiliar appliances. When I walked down the hallway, I discovered my grandfather's study, his private sanctuary that I'd left untouched out of respect, had been converted into what appeared to be a home office for Jason. His computer sat on my grandfather's antique desk. The bookshelves that once held my grandfather's first edition Hemingway collection now displayed Jason's sports trophies and business books. The fly-fishing shadow box that had hung on the wall for decades was gone. "Where are my grandfather's things?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "In the shed," Lauren answered from behind me. "We needed the space, but we stored everything carefully, I promise." I turned to face them both. "You need to leave. Now. Today. This isn't a discussion." "And go where exactly?" Jason challenged. "We've given up our apartment. The kids start school here on Monday." "Again, not my problem. You created this situation by moving in without permission." "Actually," Jason said, a smug expression crossing his face, "I've consulted with a friend who practices real estate law. Since your grandfather left the cabin to the family and we are family, we have a reasonable claim to at least partial use of the property." "That's complete bullshit," I snapped. "The will was explicit. The cabin was left to me, not the family." "That's not how my parents remember it," Jason countered. "They seem to recall your grandfather wanting the cabin to remain a family gathering place." "My parents. Of course he'd involve them." "You called my parents?" Lauren at least had the grace to look ashamed. "We needed somewhere to stay last night after you threatened to call the sheriff." They think you're being unreasonable, by the way. I pulled out my phone. Let's call them right now and sort this out. To my shock, my own mother suggested I share the blessing of the cabin and allow Lauren's family to stay, just until Jason gets back on his feet. My father, always the peacekeeper, proposed a timeshare arrangement where I would use the cabin on weekends while they lived there during the week. Neither of them seemed to grasp the fundamental violation that had occurred. By the end of the conversation, I felt completely alone in my position, painted as the selfish single woman unwilling to help her sister's struggling family. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated further. I returned to my apartment in the city and contacted Tom Wilson, a lawyer friend who had helped with my divorce. He confirmed what I already knew: the cabin was legally mine alone, and Jason and Lauren were effectively squatting. However, he warned me that if I allowed them to establish residency by staying too long, evicting them could become complicated. Don't give them an inch, Tom advised. And document everything. I drove back to the cabin the following weekend with a formal letter Tom had drafted, giving them 48 hours to vacate the premises or face legal action. I found Jason hosting some kind of barbecue with people I didn't recognize. He introduced me as my sister-in-law who's letting us use the family cabin for a while, clearly establishing his false narrative with the neighbors. When I handed him the letter, he laughed and tucked it into his pocket without reading it. "Family doesn't sue family, Abby," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Why don't you grab a burger and relax? You seem stressed." Lauren avoided me entirely, keeping busy with the children. When I finally cornered her alone in the kitchen, her eyes were red from crying. "Please don't make this harder than it already is," she pleaded. "Jason's meeting with some promising job prospects next week. Once he's employed again, we can look for our own place." "That's what this letter says," I replied. "You have 48 hours to leave, or I'm filing for a formal eviction." "I'm not kidding, Lauren." She looked at me with genuine bewilderment. "Why are you being so cold? We're family. We'd do the same for you if the situation were reversed." "No, you wouldn't," I said quietly. "And you know it." I left the barbecue and drove directly to my parents' house, determined to make them understand my position. It didn't go well. My mother accused me of lacking compassion. My father suggested I was still bitter about my divorce and taking it out on Lauren's intact family. The conversation devolved into bringing up childhood slights and perceived favoritism. "I always knew you were selfish, Abigail, but this is beyond the pale," my mother said finally. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of how you're treating your sister." That was the breaking point. I stood up, shaking with anger and hurt. "Grandpa left the cabin to me because he knew I was the only one who truly loved it for what it was, not what it was worth," I said. "And he'd be disgusted by how Jason has swooped in like a vulture, claiming what isn't his." I left amid their protests, driving back to my apartment in tears. The family I thought would support me had chosen Jason's manipulative narrative instead. I felt more alone than ever, but also more determined. The deadline in the letter came and went. They didn't leave. Tom advised me to file the formal eviction notice, warning me it could take weeks or even months to complete the process if they contested it. In the meantime, Jason was telling extended family members that I was trying to steal the family cabin that he claimed my grandfather had verbally promised would be shared. The battle lines were drawn, and I was outnumbered but resolute. This was no longer just about the cabin. It was about standing up to Jason's manipulation and fighting for what was rightfully mine, even if it meant being cast as the villain in my own family story. A week passed with no communication from my immediate family. My cousin sent confused text messages, clearly having heard Jason's version of events. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called to express her disappointment in my selfishness. Each conversation left me feeling more isolated and questioning if I was, in fact, being unreasonable. Then came the anonymous call that changed everything. "Is this Abigail Reynolds?" an unfamiliar male voice asked when I answered my phone. "Yes, who's this?" "I'm a neighbor at Crystal Lake. I don't want to get involved in family business, but I thought you should know your brother-in-law is telling everyone he's the new owner of your cabin. He's applying for membership in the Lake Association and has started some major renovations. My blood ran cold. What kind of renovations? They've got contractors there now. Looks like they're knocking down some walls inside. I just thought you should know, since he made it sound like you'd sold it to him. I thanked him and immediately called Mr. Peterson, who confirmed construction vehicles had been at the property for 2 days. I thought you knew, he said apologetically. Your brother-in-law said you'd given him the green light to modernize the place. I was in my car within 15 minutes, breaking speed limits all the way to Crystal Lake. 3 hours later, I pulled into the driveway behind a truck labeled Johnson's Construction. The front door stood open, and the sound of power tools rang out from inside. What I found nearly brought me to my knees. The interior wall separating the living room from my grandfather's study had been completely demolished. Dust covered everything, and workers were installing support beams where the wall had stood. The cabin's careful craftsmanship, the warm, intimate spaces my grandfather had designed, were being destroyed to create what Jason enthusiastically described as an open-concept great room when he saw me standing there in shock. Abby, perfect timing. What do you think? Opens the place up, right? Much more modern. I couldn't even speak. I walked numbly past him into what remained of my grandfather's study. The built-in bookshelves had been ripped out. The window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading was gone. And most devastating of all, the hand-carved mantelpiece that had been my grandfather's pride, the one with tiny fishing lures and lake creatures hidden in the design for me to find as a child, had been removed. Where is it? I finally managed to ask. Where's what? Jason replied, following me into the room. The mantelpiece. My grandfather's mantelpiece. He shrugged casually. Oh, that old thing? We tossed it. It didn't fit the new aesthetic. Something in me shattered. I walked out to the shed, ignoring Jason calling after me, and found it unlocked. Inside was chaos, my grandfather's belongings tossed haphazardly into piles. Many things were damaged from rough handling. The antique fishing rods he'd collected were nowhere to be seen. I returned to the house and confronted Jason. Where are the fishing rods? A flicker of unease crossed his face before he composed himself. We might have sold a few things. They were just gathering dust, and we needed money for the renovations. I pulled out my phone and, with shaking hands, searched a local online marketplace. There they were, my grandfather's prized possessions, listed by user J.R. Winters, Jason Robert Winters. Lauren came in from outside, Emma and Noah trailing behind her. She stopped short when she saw my face. Abby, what's wrong? Why are you here? Your husband sold Grandpa's fishing collection, I said flatly, and destroyed his study. That's what's wrong. Lauren looked genuinely shocked, turning to Jason. You said we were just storing those things. And you told me Abby approved the renovation. Jason's face hardened. We needed the money. And this place needs updating if we're going to live here long term. You're not living here long term. I shouted, finally losing my composure entirely. This is MY property that you've invaded and destroyed. The workers had stopped, watching the family drama unfold uncomfortably. I turned to them. I'm sorry, but I need you all to leave right now. This work has not been authorized by the property owner, me. Jason stepped forward, his face darkening. Don't listen to her. I've contracted your services, and I'll be the one paying you. The foreman looked between us uncertainly. Look, lady, we've got a signed contract with Mr. Winters here. If there's some kind of ownership dispute, you folks need to sort that out first. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling the police and my lawyer. Anyone still here in 5 minutes will be charged with trespassing and destruction of property. Jason laughed, but there was a nervousness to it now. You're being hysterical, Abby. The police won't do anything about a family dispute. He was wrong. While the local police were initially reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a civil matter, the situation changed when I showed them the property deed in my name, the explicit language in my grandfather's will, and proof that Jason had sold items that didn't belong to him. That's theft and fraud, the officer said, looking at Jason with new interest. And if you're not the property owner and haven't been given permission to be here, that's trespassing. Jason's confident facade finally cracked. This is ridiculous. We're family. She's just being vindictive because her husband left her, and she can't stand to see a happy family enjoying this place. Even Lauren looked appalled at this low blow. The children began crying, confused and frightened by the escalating situation. I felt terrible for them, but couldn't back down now. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. As the police escorted Jason outside to cool off, I sat down in what remained of my grandfather's study and finally let the tears flow freely. Among the construction debris, I found a small carved wooden fish that had broken off from the discarded mantelpiece, one of the hidden treasures my grandfather had created just for me. I clutched it tightly, feeling as though it was all I had left of him in this now unrecognizable space. In that moment of despair, surrounded by destruction, I made a decision. I would fight with everything I had to reclaim what was mine, no matter the cost to family relationships. Some boundaries, once crossed, could never be repaired, and Jason had bulldozed right through them all. The police couldn't remove Jason and Lauren immediately. Tenant laws required proper procedure even for squatters, but they did take a report about the stolen fishing collection and unauthorized construction. More importantly, they connected me with Sheriff Martinez, who specialized in property disputes and evictions. "What you need is an emergency eviction order," she explained after I'd shown her all my documentation. "Based on the destruction of property and evidence of fraud, we might be able to expedite the process." With Sheriff Martinez's guidance and Tom's legal expertise, I filed for an emergency hearing the next day. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harmon, reviewed the evidence, including photos of the destruction and screenshots of Jason selling my grandfather's possessions online. "I'm granting the emergency eviction," she declared. "The respondents have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Sheriff, please ensure compliance." Jason wasn't present for the hearing, another mistake on his part, but Lauren was. She sat quietly in the back of the courtroom and approached me hesitantly afterward. "Abby, please," she began, her voice breaking. "The kids are settled in their new school. Could we at least stay until the end of the month?" "I had no idea Jason was selling Grandpa's things or making those changes without your permission. He told me you two had worked everything out." For a moment, I almost wavered. Then I remembered the destroyed study, the missing fishing rods, the lies told to neighbors and family. "I'm sorry, Lauren, but no. Jason has gone too far. You can stay with Mom and Dad until you figure things out." Her face hardened. "They don't have room for all four of us, and you know it." "You're punishing my children for something Jason did." "No," I corrected her. "Jason is punishing your children by putting them in this situation. He made choices that led here, not me." She left without another word, and I felt the final thread of our sisterly relationship snap. It hurt more than I expected. The next day, Sheriff Martinez and I arrived at the cabin to serve the eviction notice officially. Jason's truck was there, but Lauren's car was gone. When no one answered our knocks, the sheriff used her authority to enter. Jason sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by beer bottles. He looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Where's Lauren? Where are the kids?" I asked, momentarily concerned. "Gone to your parents," he slurred. "Apparently I'm an embarrassment. A failure. Happy now, Abby? You've destroyed my family." "You did that yourself," I replied coldly. "Sheriff Martinez is here to ensure you leave the premises within 24 hours, per the court order." Jason stood suddenly, knocking his chair backward. "This is bullshit. Your grandfather promised this place would stay in the family. I have just as much right to be here as you." Sheriff Martinez stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to calm down. This is a legal eviction with a court order. You need to begin packing your belongings." "I'm not going anywhere," Jason declared, his voice rising dangerously. "This is my home now. Sir, if you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to remove you forcibly and charge you with resisting a court order," Sheriff Martinez warned. What happened next still plays in my nightmares. Jason lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage. "You entitled bitch. You've always had everything handed to you." Sheriff Martinez reacted instantly, placing herself between us and restraining Jason. She called for backup as he continued shouting threats and obscenities. You'll regret this, Abby. Nobody wants you here. Your grandfather only left you this place because he felt sorry for you after Mark left. Everyone knows it. His words were designed to wound, and they did. But they also confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Jason's sense of entitlement went far deeper than I'd realized. When backup arrived, Jason was arrested for threatening behavior and resisting the eviction order. As they led him away, neighbors gathered outside, witnessing his meltdown. Mr. Peterson approached me afterward. "I should have called you sooner," he said regretfully. "He's been acting strangely for weeks, telling everyone different stories about why he was here." "It's not your fault," I assured him. "Jason is convincing when he wants to be." With Jason gone, I enlisted Mr. Peterson's help to change the locks again and secure the property. Then came the devastating task of assessing the damage. The construction crew had left their work half-finished when the police first arrived, leaving exposed beams and electrical wiring. The hardwood floors were scratched from moving furniture. Walls had been painted garish colors. But the worst damage was to my grandfather's study. Not only had the walls been demolished, but I discovered water damage from a pipe that had been improperly moved during the renovation. Family photos stored in the desk had been ruined. The antique desk itself had deep gouges from careless use. A professional assessment put the physical damage at over $40,000. The emotional damage was incalculable. My parents finally visited the cabin a week after Jason's arrest. Seeing the destruction firsthand shifted something in their perspective. My mother cried when she saw the remnants of the mantelpiece, remembering how her father had carved it over one entire winter. "I had no idea it was this bad," she admitted quietly. "Jason told us you had approved all the changes." "And you believed him over me," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "He was very convincing," my father offered weakly. "And with the children involved." "I understand putting the children first," I acknowledged. "But not at the expense of the truth." Lauren called that evening, sounding exhausted and defeated. Jason had been released on bail, but was facing charges of criminal threatening and property destruction. More significantly, she discovered credit card statements showing he'd been stealing from my parents as well, borrowing their credit card information for months. "I've filed for divorce," she said flatly. "I can't do this anymore, Abby. He's been lying to me about everything, his job, our finances, even conversations he claimed to have with you. I found emails showing he was planning to take over the cabin months ago, right after Grandpa died." "I'm so sorry, Lauren," I said sincerely. "For all of it." "No, I'm sorry. I should have seen through him. I should have stood up to him." Her voice broke. "Can you ever forgive me?" That question hung between us, complicated and raw. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily or quickly, but acknowledging the truth was at least a start. As word spread about what had really happened, other family members reached out to apologize for their rush to judgment. My Aunt Patricia revealed that Jason had approached her about investing in renovations at the cabin, claiming he was a co-owner. My cousin Michael admitted Jason had borrowed money from him too, never repaying it. A pattern emerged of manipulation and deceit extending far beyond just the cabin situation. Jason had been playing an elaborate confidence game with the entire family for years, using Lauren as his unwitting shield. The physical removal of Jason from my property proved to be just the beginning of a long road ahead. But standing in what remained of my grandfather's study, holding the small wooden fish carving I'd salvaged, I felt a strange sense of peace amidst the chaos. I had stood my ground and fought for what was right, even when it would have been easier to give in. Whatever came next, I knew my grandfather would have been proud of that. The weeks following Jason's removal from the cabin were a blur of practical matters, hiring contractors to assess and repair the damage, working with my insurance company to file claims, providing statements to the police for their ongoing investigation into the theft and fraud charges against Jason. Each task was necessary but draining, leaving little energy for processing the emotional fallout. Lauren and the children moved into a small apartment in the city with financial help from my parents. She filed for divorce and a restraining order after discovering Jason had emptied their joint savings account. The family division was painful but unavoidable, with most relatives finally seeing Jason for what he was once. The full extent of his deception came to light. My mother called regularly, her initial defense of Jason gradually transforming into guilt and regret. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," she admitted during one particularly emotional conversation. "I was so focused on the children that I couldn't see what was really happening." "We all have blind spots when it comes to family," I told her, finding forgiveness easier than I'd expected. My anger had shifted entirely to Jason, the true architect of the situation. My father was quieter in his reconciliation, showing up at the cabin one weekend with his toolbox and a determination to help with repairs. We worked side by side replacing damaged floorboards, his way of apologizing without words. The cabin itself became my therapy. Each repair felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been taken, not just physically but emotionally. I hired local craftsman Carl Jameson to recreate the mantelpiece based on photographs, though we both knew it would never be exactly the same as my grandfather's work. "We can honor the spirit of it," Carl said thoughtfully as we reviewed the designs. "Maybe add some new elements that represent this chapter of the cabin story, too. Scars can be beautiful if they tell a true story." His words stayed with me, a metaphor for my own healing process. Through persistent online searching and the help of local antique dealers, I managed to recover 3 of my grandfather's 7 fishing rods. The buyers, upon learning they'd purchased stolen goods, were largely cooperative, though one insisted on keeping his fair purchase until legal pressure convinced him otherwise. During the cleanup, I discovered something unexpected behind a damaged section of drywall in the study, a small metal box my grandfather had concealed there. Inside were old photographs I'd never seen, letters between my grandparents when they were young, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a letter written shortly before his death. "My dearest Abby, asterisk if you're reading this, you've likely made the cabin truly yours at last. Perhaps you've renovated this old study where I've hidden this note. I hope whatever changes you make bring you joy. Asterisk, I've left the cabin to you because you understand something the others don't, that its value isn't in its walls or location, but in the peace it brings and the memories it holds. Some may question my decision or feel entitled to what is yours. Stand firm. Asterisk, remember our nights watching the stars? You once asked me if the Big Dipper was pouring out dreams or collecting wishes. Both, I said. That's how I see this cabin. It collected my wishes and dreams, and now pours them out to you. Asterisk, all my love. Asterisk, Grandpa. Asterisk, I sat on the floor amidst the construction dust and cried, not from sadness this time, but from the profound validation his words provided. He had anticipated the conflict and still stood by his decision. The letter became my talisman during difficult moments in the rebuilding process. 3 months after the eviction, Lauren visited the cabin for the first time. She stood in the half-repaired living room, taking in the changes with tears in her eyes. I didn't realize how much Jason had destroyed until now, she said quietly. I let him convince me it was all improvements. He was convincing, I acknowledged, offering her coffee on the newly rebuilt deck. We sat in awkward silence until she finally spoke. I don't expect us to go back to how things were before. I know I betrayed your trust. But I hope someday we can build something new. The kids miss you. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but genuine. We agreed the children could visit the cabin occasionally, with Lauren as a day guest only. Trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, with clear boundaries. My relationship with my parents improved more quickly, especially after they became instrumental in helping the police build their case against Jason. Records revealed he had attempted to take out a loan using the cabin as collateral, forging my signature on the application. It was this discovery that finally closed any lingering questions about his intentions. The restoration project attracted attention from others around the lake. Neighbors who had initially believed Jason's stories now stopped by with casseroles and offers of help. Mr. Peterson brought his grandson to help restore the dock that had been damaged during Jason's tenure. Community rallies around truth eventually, Mr. Peterson noted as we worked. May take time, but it finds its way. Through these interactions, I found unexpected connections. Cassandra Miller, a local artist, helped me create a memorial piece incorporating fragments of the original mantelpiece that couldn't be restored. Brian Hawkins, a contractor who specialized in historic renovations, taught me techniques for preserving the cabin's character while making necessary updates. These new friendships helped fill the void left by the family fracture, creating a support system I hadn't realized I needed. When I mentioned this to my therapist, another positive outcome of the ordeal, she nodded knowingly. Trauma has a way of revealing who belongs in your life, she said. Sometimes the family we choose is more reliable than the one we're born into. 6 months after the confrontation, Jason went to trial for multiple charges including fraud, theft, property damage, and threatening behavior. I testified alongside several family members who had discovered his deceptions. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution. Lauren attended the sentencing with me, a silent show of solidarity that meant more than words could express. Afterward, she confessed something that shook me. He wasn't just financially abusive, she said quietly as we sat in my car. I was afraid of him, Abby. The way he would look at me when I questioned him. I started believing I was crazy for doubting him. The revelation added another layer to my understanding of the situation and softened some of my lingering resentment toward her. She had been Jason's first and most thoroughly manipulated victim. As winter approached, I completed enough repairs to make the cabin fully functional again. Many improvements would wait until spring, but the essential character had been restored. I spent Thanksgiving there alone by choice, needing the solitude to reflect on the tumultuous year. Sitting in my grandfather's partially restored study, I reread his letter and thought about resilience. The cabin had weathered many storms over its decades, literal hurricanes, the slow decay of time, and now this human destruction. Yet it stood, perhaps stronger for having been rebuilt with such intention and care. Like the cabin, I too had been damaged but not destroyed. The boundaries I'd established with my family were healthier than the unquestioning trust that had existed before. The new relationships I'd formed were built on honesty rather than obligation. As snow began to fall outside the window, I raised a glass to my grandfather's photograph. "You were right," I told him. Standing firm was worth it. The cabin was mine again, not just legally, but in every way that mattered. And I was stronger for having fought for it. 6 months after the last of the major repairs were completed, I stood on the dock watching the sunset turn Crystal Lake into a canvas of orange and pink. The cabin behind me was both familiar and new, restored to honor my grandfather's vision while incorporating thoughtful changes that made it uniquely mine. The walls in the main living area were back in place, defining the cozy spaces my grandfather had originally designed. The study had been rebuilt with careful attention to its original character, though a new built-in bookcase now featured a secure display for the recovered fishing rods. The mantelpiece, while not an exact replica of the original, carried its spirit with Carl's beautiful craftsmanship, incorporating some of the salvaged pieces into a new design. Outside, a state-of-the-art security system had been discreetly installed, along with cameras monitoring the property when I was away. The neighboring community had formed a more vigilant watch network after hearing about what happened. Mr. Peterson proudly served as the unofficial head of this informal group, checking on the cabin regularly when I was in the city. My life had found a new rhythm, splitting time between my apartment in the city and extended stays at the cabin. My accounting firm had approved a flexible remote work arrangement, allowing me to spend 3 weeks of each month at Crystal Lake. The small bedroom I'd originally planned to convert into an office had been completed at last, with windows overlooking the water providing inspiration during work hours. More significant than the physical rebuilding was the emotional healing that had gradually taken place. Lauren and I had established a cautious but genuine reconciliation. Her divorce from Jason had been finalized, and she'd found strength I hadn't known she possessed, securing a full-time position at her dental practice and creating a stable home for Emma and Noah. The children visited the cabin one weekend each month, their initial confusion about the family conflict giving way to enjoyment of our time together. I taught Emma to fish from the dock, just as my grandfather had taught me. Noah, more interested in technology than nature, nevertheless developed an appreciation for stargazing with the telescope I'd installed on the back deck. Aunt Abby, Emma had asked during their last visit, "Is it okay that I still sometimes miss Dad even though he did bad things?" Her question broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. "Of course it is, sweetheart," I'd told her. "People are complicated. You can miss the good parts while understanding why he can't be in our lives right now." My parents had become regular visitors as well, my father taking particular pride in helping with maintenance projects around the property. My mother and I had several long, difficult conversations that cleared away decades of misunderstandings. She finally shared that her distance from the cabin during my childhood had stemmed from complicated grief after her mother died there, context I'd never known that helped me understand her perspective during the conflict with Jason. "I envied your connection to this place and to Dad," she admitted during one particularly honest conversation. "When Jason started making claims about the cabin, I think part of me wanted to believe him because it justified my own complicated feelings." "I wish you'd told me sooner," I said, finding compassion where anger had once lived. "Some truths take time to be ready for telling," she replied, wisdom replacing defensiveness. As for Jason, he remained in prison, though rumors suggested he would be released early for good behavior. Lauren had received several letters from him, alternating between apologies and subtle manipulation attempts. She shared them with her therapist, but didn't respond. The children received carefully screened communications through a family court program, maintaining a connection that their counselor deemed important for their emotional development. The most surprising relationship to emerge from the conflict was with my cousin Michael, who had previously been on the periphery of my life. After discovering he too had been deceived by Jason, we bonded over the experience and discovered shared interests beyond family obligation. His expertise in sustainable building had proved invaluable during the cabin renovations, and we now enjoyed a friendship that extended beyond family gatherings. This particular weekend marked a significant milestone, the first family gathering at the cabin since the conflict. Not everyone had been invited. The guest list was carefully curated to include only those who had demonstrated respect for my boundaries and genuine remorse for their initial judgments. Lauren and the children, my parents, Michael and his wife, and Aunt Patricia would be arriving the following day for a Memorial Day barbecue. I had established clear expectations in the invitations. This was my home, not communal family property, and I was choosing to share it with them as a hostess, not an obligation. To my relief, everyone had responded with understanding and appreciation for the invitation. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. Turning, I found Mr. Peterson approaching with a small package. "Evening, Abby. Hope I'm not interrupting your thinking time." "Not at all," I smiled. "Just enjoying the view." "Found something that might interest you," he said, handing me the package. "Was cleaning out my attic and came across these." Inside were photographs from the 1970s, my grandfather and a much younger Mr. Peterson working on the cabin's original construction. In several images, a small carved wooden fish was visible on what would become the mantelpiece. "Thought you might want these for your collection," he said. "Your grandfather was mighty proud of this place. Even prouder of you, though." "Thank you," I said, emotion catching in my throat. "These are precious." After he left, I returned to watching the sunset, the photographs a tangible reminder of the cabin's history and purpose. My grandfather had built this place as a sanctuary, a gathering place for those he loved and trusted. In fighting to protect it, I hadn't just preserved property, I'd honored his intention. The most valuable lesson from the ordeal wasn't about property rights or legal battles. It was about the courage to establish boundaries, even when it meant being misunderstood or labeled selfish. It was about recognizing that true family supports your well-being rather than exploiting your generosity. And perhaps most importantly, it was about trusting my own judgment even when voices around me suggested I was wrong. Jason had nearly succeeded in his takeover because he'd weaponized family loyalty against me, counting on my reluctance to be seen as the villain. Standing firm had cost me relationships in the short term, but ultimately revealed which connections were worth preserving. As darkness fell over the lake, I gathered the photographs and headed inside. The cabin welcomed me with warm lighting and the lingering scent of pine. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, family gathering here again, but on terms that honored both the property and my role as its steward. I placed the photographs on my grandfather's restored desk and ran my fingers along the grain of the wood. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "We protected what matters." In the quiet of the evening, I could almost hear his reply in the gentle creaking of the cabin's timbers. "The people who truly love you will eventually understand, and those who don't, well, they were never in your corner to begin with." That night, I slept peacefully in the cabin that was undeniably, rightfully mine. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure when you knew you were right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Family conflicts can be the most painful kind, but sometimes they lead to necessary growth and stronger boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember, protecting what's yours isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it gives strength to anyone facing similar challenges. My name is Amber Thompson, and I'm 27 years old now, but the scars from my childhood still ache every day. When I was 10, my sister Stephanie's falling game left me with a broken arm that my parents laughed off as dramatics. 17 years later, a routine MRI for chronic pain revealed the shocking truth about what really happened that day and turned my family's life upside down when the doctor reached for the phone to call the police. I never imagined medical evidence would finally validate what nobody believed back then. If you're watching this, drop a comment saying where you're from, hit like and subscribe, and stay with me because my story might help you recognize when a child in your life is silently screaming for help. From the outside, the Thompson family looked picture perfect. My father Bradley was a successful accountant. My mother Samantha taught second grade at the local elementary school, and we lived in a spacious 4-bedroom house in a nice suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and weekend barbecues. But inside those walls, a very different reality existed, one where the family hierarchy was clearly established, and I was at the bottom. My sister Stephanie was 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, she was the golden child. She had our parents wrapped around her finger with her charming smile, outgoing personality, and remarkable ability to transform into the perfect daughter whenever adults were watching. To everyone outside our home, Stephanie was polite, helpful, and mature beyond her years. Teachers adored her, neighbors commented on what a lovely girl she was, and my parents beamed with pride at every compliment. I was different. While Stephanie was confident and social, I was quiet and introspective. I loved drawing, reading for hours in my bedroom, and making up stories in my journal. My second grade teacher once told my mother I had an old soul and a vivid imagination. Unfortunately, in my family, these traits weren't celebrated. They were seen as weaknesses. My sensitivity was met with eye rolls and comments like, "Toughen up," or "Stop being so dramatic." The disparity in how we were treated was subtle at first, but became more obvious as we grew older. When Stephanie brought home an A on a test, she'd receive enthusiastic praise and sometimes a small reward. When I achieved the same, it was met with a quick, "Good job," and immediate redirection to something else. If we both misbehaved in the same way, her punishment would be lighter or sometimes non-existent, while I'd lose privileges for days. "Stephanie is just more responsible," my mother would say when I pointed out the unfairness. "When you're older, you'll understand." But the truth was, Stephanie had mastered the art of manipulation. She knew exactly how to present herself to adults while being completely different when they weren't looking. By age 9, she had developed an almost scientific approach to tormenting me without leaving evidence. One of her favorite tactics was to pinch the sensitive skin under my upper arm, hard enough to bring tears to my eyes, but never hard enough to leave a mark. She'd wait until our parents were just out of sight, but close enough to hear if I cried out. When I inevitably did, she'd immediately adopt a confused, innocent expression. "What's wrong with you?" my father would call from the other room. "Nothing," Stephanie would answer quickly. "Amber's just being weird again." And that would be that. No investigation, no questions, just an assumption that I was overreacting as usual. My childhood friend Kayla Wilson was one of the few people who witnessed the reality of my relationship with Stephanie. Kayla lived next door and often came over to play. During one play date when we were about 8, Stephanie stormed into my room, grabbed the doll I was playing with, and snapped its arm off before tossing it back at me. "What did you do that for?" Kayla asked, her eyes wide with shock. "It's my doll too," Stephanie replied coolly. "And if you tell my mom, I'll say you both broke it and Amber's trying to blame me." When Kayla suggested we tell my mother anyway, I shook my head. It won't matter. They never believe me. The pattern continued year after year. When I was 9, Stephanie accidentally deleted a school project I'd worked on for weeks from the family computer. My parents told me it was my responsibility to back up my work. When she borrowed my favorite sweater and returned it with a stain, I was criticized for making a big deal about material things. Each incident reinforced what I already knew. In our family, Stephanie could do no wrong, and I could do no right. As Stephanie entered middle school, her tactics escalated. The psychological torment continued, but she began adding physical intimidation to her repertoire. She'd stand too close, raise her hand as if to strike me, then laugh when I flinched. She'd accidentally bump into me while carrying hot chocolate, causing minor burns that she'd immediately apologize for with such conviction that even I almost believed it was unintentional. "It was just an accident," became her mantra, one that my parents readily accepted without question. By the time Stephanie was 13 and I was 10, our dynamic was firmly established. She was the perfect daughter who occasionally had to deal with her overly sensitive, dramatic little sister. I was the family problem, the one who needed to learn to be tougher, less emotional, more like my sister. What none of them realized was that Stephanie's behavior was about to cross a line from cruel to dangerous, and the consequences would echo through our lives for years to come. It started on a rainy Saturday afternoon in April. Stephanie was bored, and a bored Stephanie was always dangerous for me. I was sitting on my bed, drawing in my sketchbook, when she appeared in my doorway with a glint in her eye that I'd learned to fear. "Let's play a game," she announced, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "I'm busy," I mumbled, not looking up from my drawing. I'd learned that direct refusal would only make things worse, but sometimes I could redirect her attention. Not this time. She walked over and snatched my sketchbook, holding it up high out of my reach. "It's called the falling game," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "It's really fun." "Give that back," I said, standing on my bed to try to reach my sketchbook. "I will, after we play." Her smile widened. "Unless you want me to show Mom and Dad what you wrote about them in your diary." My blood ran cold. I hadn't even realized she'd found my diary, hidden under my mattress. Inside were my honest feelings about how unfairly I was treated, how much it hurt when they dismissed my feelings, how sometimes I wished I had different parents. If they read those words, I was certain they'd never forgive me. "What do I have to do?" I asked quietly, defeated before the game had even begun. The falling game turned out to be exactly what it sounded like. Stephanie would push me, and I would fall. The first time, she had me stand on my bed and then shoved me off onto the floor. It hurt my knees, but it wasn't terrible. She seemed disappointed by my lack of reaction. The next time, a week later, she upped the stakes. We were alone in the house for an hour while our parents went grocery shopping. Stephanie led me to the staircase. "Stand on the 3rd step," she instructed. "No way," I protested. "That's dangerous." She pulled my diary from her pocket. "I wonder what Mom would think about page 12? Reluctantly, I stood on the 3rd step. Stephanie positioned herself behind me. "Now close your eyes and fall backward," she said. "I'll catch you." "You promise?" I asked, my voice small. "Cross my heart," she replied. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and fell all the way to the hardwood floor below. Stephanie had stepped aside at the last moment. The wind was knocked out of me, and I had a large bruise on my back for days, but I told my parents I'd tripped while running in the house. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. The game continued for months, with Stephanie finding new and more frightening ways to make me fall. She'd push me off the back porch, trip me in the yard, or shove me into the pool when no one was looking. The threats escalated too. If I didn't play, she'd break my things, tell her parents lies about me, or reveal my diary contents. I tried to tell my mother once, approaching her cautiously while she prepared dinner. "Mom, Stephanie keeps pushing me and making me fall on purpose." Without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping, my mother sighed. "Amber, don't exaggerate. I'm sure she's just playing around. But she calls it the falling game, and she threatens me if I don't enough." She interrupted, her knife pausing momentarily. "Your sister would never do something like that. You need to stop making up stories for attention." The dismissal stung worse than any of my falls. I realized then that no matter what Stephanie did, my parents would never believe me over her. As the game continued, Stephanie occasionally invited her friends Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy to watch. They never participated directly, but they never intervened either. They'd giggle nervously when Stephanie would demonstrate her power over me, probably relieved they weren't her targets. "Your sister is kind of mean," Heather whispered to me once when Stephanie left the room. "Why don't you tell your parents?" Jessica added. "They don't believe me," I replied simply. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing more. The worst incident before the broken arm came when Stephanie had me climb onto the backyard fence. It was about 5 feet high, made of wooden planks with a flat top. She told me to walk along it like a balance beam. "If you make it all the way across, I'll leave you alone for a whole week," she promised. Desperate for a reprieve, I tried. I made it about halfway before Stephanie suddenly yelled and startled me. I lost my balance and fell, narrowly missing a garden rock with my head. Instead, I landed hard on my side in the flower bed, destroying my mother's prized begonias. The punishment for the flowers was no television for 2 weeks. The pain in my side lasted just as long, but I didn't tell anyone about that part. After each incident, I developed new anxieties. I began having stomachaches before school, afraid of what Stephanie might do on the walk home. I had trouble sleeping, jumping at every creak in our old house. I became hypervigilant, always aware of where Stephanie was and what mood she seemed to be in. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. A few days after my 10th birthday, Stephanie found me reading in the backyard and announced she had a special version of the game planned. "This one is going to be epic," she said with a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Meet me behind the shed after lunch tomorrow. And remember what happens if you don't show up." That night, I could barely sleep, my mind racing with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. I had no idea that the next day would change my life forever. The morning of the incident was deceptively beautiful. It was a Saturday in early June, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of my mother's roses through the open windows of our home. I remember staring out my bedroom window, desperately wishing I could disappear. My stomach was in knots, my breakfast untouched as the clock ticked closer to lunchtime. At precisely noon, my father called up the stairs. "Kids, lunch is ready." We gathered around the kitchen table. My father reading the newspaper, my mother placing turkey sandwiches in front of us, and Stephanie sitting across from me with that knowing smile that only I could interpret. She kicked my shin under the table and mouthed the words, "1 hour," when our parents weren't looking. I forced myself to eat half my sandwich, though each bite felt like swallowing sand. When lunch was over, my father retreated to his home office to catch up on work, and my mother settled in the living room with her book club selection. Stephanie gave me a pointed look before heading upstairs to her room. At 1 o'clock, I made my way to the backyard, my footsteps heavy with dread. Our property backed up to a small wooded area, and the shed sat at the edge of our lawn, partially hidden by a large oak tree. When I rounded the corner, I found Stephanie waiting, a coil of rope in her hands. "You're late," she said, though I wasn't. "What's the rope for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Today, we're going to play the ultimate falling game, she announced proudly. You're going to climb up there. She pointed to the roof of the shed. It wasn't extremely high, maybe 8 feet off the ground, but to my 10-year-old self, it might as well have been a skyscraper. No way, I said, backing up. That's too dangerous. I could really get hurt. Don't be such a baby, she scoffed. I've climbed up there tons of times. Besides, she pulled my diary from her pocket, a different one than before, my new secret diary I thought I'd hidden well inside my pillowcase. I found some interesting stuff in here about how you think Mom and Dad love me more than you. Imagine how sad they'd be to read that. Tears sprang to my eyes. Please, Stephanie. Don't make me do this. It's easy, she insisted, ignoring my plea. I'll help you up, and all you have to do is stand at the edge and jump. There's soft grass below, it'll be fine. When I still hesitated, her expression darkened. Fine. I guess I'll go show Mom what you wrote about her cooking. What was it? Sometimes I pretend to like Mom's lasagna because everyone would get mad if I said it tastes like garbage. It was such a small thing, but in our family, criticizing my mother's cooking was tantamount to treason. With a sinking heart, I walked toward the shed. Stephanie had already positioned the old wooden ladder our father used for cleaning the gutters. It looked ancient and rickety, with one rung visibly cracked. You go first, I said, a last desperate attempt to ensure my safety. Nice try. You're going up, or everyone sees your diary. Now. With trembling hands, I began to climb. The ladder shifted slightly under my weight, and I gasped, clinging tighter to the sides. Hurry up. Stephanie called from below. Step by step, I made my way up. When I reached the top, the challenge of getting from the ladder onto the sloped roof of the shed became apparent. I hesitated, looking down at Stephanie. I can't do it, I said. It's too hard to get on the roof. Just swing your leg over and pull yourself up, she instructed impatiently. Do it now, or I'm going inside with this. She waved my diary. I took a deep breath and tried to do as she said, swinging my right leg over to touch the roof. As I shifted my weight, the ladder wobbled. I froze in terror. Stop being so dramatic. Stephanie snapped. Look, I'll hold the ladder steady. She grabbed the sides of the ladder, and I cautiously continued my ascent. Finally, I managed to scramble onto the roof, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The shed roof was covered in old asphalt shingles that scratched my palms and knees as I crawled to the center. Stand up, Stephanie commanded from below. I can't, it's too steep. I called back, genuine panic in my voice. Stand up, or I'm getting the diary right now. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself to my feet, my arms outstretched for balance like a tightrope walker. The roof felt unsteady beneath me, bits of old shingle crumbling under my sneakers. Now walk to the edge and jump. Stephanie called, excitement in her voice. I inched forward, each step a terrifying eternity. When I reached the edge, I looked down. The ground seemed miles away, though it was only about 8 feet. Stephanie stood back now, watching expectantly. I'm scared, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. Just jump already, she shouted, losing patience. Or are you too much of a baby? I want to come down, I sobbed. Please, let me use the ladder. Jump or I'm going inside right now, she threatened, taking a step toward the house. I looked down again, trying to convince myself it wasn't that far. Maybe if I sat down first and then lowered myself? I began to lower my body, but as I did, my foot slipped on a loose shingle. I felt myself falling, but not in the controlled way I'd planned. My body twisted in the air, my arms flailing wildly as I tried to regain control. The impact came with a sickening crack that I felt more than heard. I landed awkwardly on my left side, my arm taking the brunt of the fall. Pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced shot through me, white-hot and blinding. I screamed, a primal sound that tore from my throat without conscious thought. Stephanie was at my side in an instant, her expression a mixture of shock and fear. Shut up, she hissed. You're fine. Stop screaming. But I couldn't stop. The pain was overwhelming, consuming every part of me. I looked down at my arm and nearly fainted. It bent at an unnatural angle just above the wrist. Stephanie's fear quickly transformed into self-preservation. "I'm getting Mom and Dad," she said, running toward the house. "Don't tell them I made you climb up there." Minutes later, my parents rushed into the backyard. My mother reached me first, her eyes widening at the sight of my arm. "What happened?" she demanded, looking between Stephanie and me. Before I could speak, Stephanie jumped in. We were playing, and Amber decided to climb on the shed roof even though I told her not to. She was trying to show off and she fell. "Is that true?" my father asked, his tone already suggesting he believed Stephanie. Through my tears and pain, I tried to tell the truth. "No, she made me climb up there." She said. "She's lying." Stephanie interrupted. "Why would I make her climb on the roof? That doesn't even make sense." My parents exchanged a look I'd seen many times before. The one that said they'd already decided who to believe. "Honestly, Amber," my mother sighed as my father carefully helped me to my feet. "What were you thinking?" But I didn't, I began. My father cut me off with a chuckle. "Always the dramatic one, aren't you? Come on, let's get some ice on that arm." They actually laughed. My arm was clearly broken, I was in excruciating pain, and they laughed it off as another example of my dramatic nature. Only when the swelling became impossible to ignore did they finally decide a trip to the hospital might be necessary. "It's probably just a sprain," my mother said as we drove to the emergency room, "but we should get it checked out." The emergency room doctor, Dr. Morris, took one look at my arm and ordered X-rays immediately. When the results came back, his expression turned serious. "It's a complete fracture of the distal radius," he explained to my parents. "She'll need a cast for at least 6 weeks. As he prepared to set the bone, Dr. Morris asked how the injury occurred. My father explained that I had fallen while playing. "I was climbing on our shed and I fell," I added quietly, not mentioning Stephanie's role with my parents standing right there. Dr. Morris nodded, but I noticed him making additional notes in my chart. He asked a few more questions about how I'd landed and how high the shed was. Then he turned to my parents. "Children her age don't typically climb that high without encouragement," he remarked. "Was she supervised?" "Our older daughter was with her," my mother replied defensively. "Amber tends to be impulsive and, well, she likes attention." The doctor's expression remained neutral as he finished setting my arm and applying the cast. Before we left, he gave me a gentle smile and said, "Take care of yourself, Amber. No more climbing, okay?" I nodded silently, knowing it wouldn't matter what I said. The narrative had already been established. Amber was being dramatic again. Amber was seeking attention. Amber did something foolish and got hurt. As we drove home, Stephanie sat beside me in the back seat, smirking triumphantly when our parents weren't looking. She had won again, and we both knew it. My arm throbbed beneath the heavy cast, but the pain of being disbelieved, dismissed, and blamed hurt far worse. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the bulky white cast and made a promise to myself. Someday, someone would believe me. Someday, the truth would come out. I just had no idea it would take 17 years and a medical miracle to make it happen. The 6 weeks I spent in that first cast were just the beginning of a long journey. When the doctor removed it, my arm looked pale and shrunken, but more concerning was the persistent pain that never fully went away. The official diagnosis was normal post-fracture discomfort that would resolve with time. It didn't. I returned to school with instructions to take it easy in physical education class, but the whispers had already spread. "Amber broke her arm trying to fly off her shed," one classmate said. "I heard she did it to get attention," added another. Stephanie, of course, did nothing to correct these rumors. If anything, she enhanced them with carefully placed comments and exaggerated eye rolls whenever the subject came up. The incident created a visible marker of the dynamic in our family. The broken arm became emblematic of how they viewed me: fragile, dramatic, prone to poor decisions. Whenever I complained about anything afterward, someone would inevitably reference the shed incident as evidence of my tendency toward exaggeration. "Remember when you thought climbing on the shed was a good idea?" my father would say whenever I suggested anything even mildly adventurous. "Let's not repeat that disaster." The physical pain in my arm continued, becoming a dull ache that flared up in cold weather or when I used it too much. I learned to adapt, to favor my right arm, to hide winces when the pain spiked unexpectedly. Complaining only reinforced their perception of me as overly sensitive, so I stopped mentioning it. By the time I was 12, I'd convinced myself that maybe this was just how arms were supposed to feel. The psychological impact was far worse than the physical. My relationship with my family deteriorated further after the shed incident. I withdrew into myself, spending more time alone in my room with my books and art supplies. I developed an intense fear of heights that persisted for years. Worst of all, I stopped trusting my own perceptions and feelings. When everyone around you consistently dismisses your experiences, you begin to question yourself. I did try to tell other adults what had happened. A few months after the incident, I gathered my courage and approached Ms. Jenkins, my 5th grade teacher, after class. My sister made me climb on our shed, and that's how I broke my arm, I confessed, my heart pounding. She makes me do dangerous things and threatens me if I don't. Ms. Jenkins' face showed concern, but also uncertainty. That sounds very serious, Amber. Have you told your parents about this? They don't believe me, I said, tears welling in my eyes. They think I'm making it up. She promised to speak with the school counselor about it, and the next week I was called to Mr. Peterson's office. He was a kind-looking man with a gray beard who spoke in a gentle voice, but it quickly became apparent that he'd already formed an opinion. Your teacher mentioned you've been telling some concerning stories, he began. I've spoken with your parents, and they're worried about your tendency to embellish the truth. My heart sank. They had called my parents before even speaking with me. I'm not lying, I insisted. Stephanie really did make me climb on the shed. Your parents mentioned you've had difficulty adjusting since your sister entered middle school. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Sometimes when older siblings get more independence, younger siblings feel left out and try to get attention in other ways. I left his office with a pamphlet about healthy sibling relationships and the crushing realization that no adult was going to help me. The system was designed to believe parents over children, and my parents believed Stephanie over me. I was trapped. As Stephanie entered her teenage years, her methods of control became more sophisticated. The falling game ended after the broken arm. Perhaps even she realized she'd gone too far, but she found subtler ways to torment me. She'd borrow my things without asking and return them damaged. She'd make cutting comments about my appearance when no one else could hear. She'd sabotage my friendships with casual lies told to my classmates. One unexpected blessing came in my freshman year of high school when I met Mr. Brian Taylor, my art teacher. He noticed my talent for painting and encouraged me to express myself through art. More importantly, he seemed to see beyond my quiet exterior to the pain beneath. Your paintings have a lot of shadows in them, Amber, he observed one day after class. There's beauty there, but also darkness. For a moment, I considered telling him everything about Stephanie, about the shed, about years of not being believed. But the memory of previous attempts stopped me. Instead, I simply nodded. Art is a safe place to put the things we can't say out loud, he told me. Whatever those shadows are, you can put them on canvas. It might not fix them, but it might make them easier to carry. His kindness and understanding became a lifeline. I poured my experiences into my artwork, creating pieces that expressed what I couldn't say in words. When I graduated high school, Mr. Taylor wrote me a letter that I've kept to this day. Your resilience inspires me. Whatever storms you've weathered have given you a depth of perspective most people twice your age don't possess. Don't let the shadows define you, let them deepen your light. College was my escape. I chose a school 3 states away, ignoring my parents' pressure to attend the local university where Stephanie was studying business. For the first time, I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder. I made friends who had no preconceived notions about me being dramatic or attention-seeking. I studied psychology, driven by a desire to understand the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. But the physical pain in my arm never went away. If anything, it worsened over time. By my mid-20s, I had developed chronic pain that radiated from my wrist up to my elbow. It affected my ability to type for long periods, to carry heavy objects, even to perform simple tasks like opening jars. I tried over-the-counter pain relievers, heating pads, ice packs, compression bandages. Nothing provided more than temporary relief. My relationship with my family remained strained. I visited for major holidays, but kept the trips short and superficial. Stephanie had matured somewhat, or at least became better at hiding her manipulative tendencies. She graduated with honors, secured a prestigious job at a marketing firm, and became engaged to Thomas, a man who seemed genuinely nice, but had no idea who his fiancé really was. My parents continued to view me through the same lens they always had. Any achievement of mine was met with mild surprise, as if they hadn't expected me to succeed. Any problem I encountered was subtly attributed to my own poor choices or overreactions. Have you tried meditation for that arm pain? My mother suggested during one holiday visit. I read an article that said most chronic pain is psychosomatic. The implication was clear. The pain was all in my head, just another example of my dramatic nature. I stopped mentioning it to them entirely. By the time I turned 27, the pain had become debilitating. I had a good job as a counselor at a youth center, working with teens who reminded me too much of my younger self. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could recognize signs of abuse in these children and advocate fiercely for them, yet I had never been able to get justice for myself. After a particularly bad flare-up that left me unable to work for 3 days, my friend Kayla, who had remained close despite the distance, insisted I see a specialist. "This isn't normal, Amber," she said firmly. "Broken bones don't cause pain for 17 years unless something wasn't treated properly. Promise me you'll make an appointment." Reluctantly, I agreed. Little did I know that this appointment would change everything, finally bringing to light the truth that had been buried for almost 2 decades. The waiting room of Dr. Laura Mitchell's office was painted a calming blue, with watercolor landscapes hanging on the walls and soft instrumental music playing through hidden speakers. I sat with my intake forms on a clipboard, pen hovering over the section labeled "Reason for Visit." How could I explain 17 years of pain in a few lines? I finally wrote, "Chronic pain in left arm following childhood fracture, progressively worsening. Dr. Mitchell was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that I appreciated immediately. "So, Miss Thompson," she began after reviewing my forms, "you broke your arm when you were 10, and you've had pain ever since?" "Yes," I replied. "It's never really healed properly. At least, that's what it feels like." She asked me to describe the pain, its location, intensity, what made it better or worse. Then she examined my arm, gently manipulating it in different directions and noting when I winced. "Your medical records indicate this was treated as a simple distal radius fracture," she said, looking at her computer screen. "But your symptoms suggest there might have been more complexity to the injury. I'd like to get an MRI to see what's really going on in there." Getting insurance approval for the MRI took 3 weeks of persistent phone calls and paperwork. When the day finally arrived, I was more nervous than I expected to be. The MRI machine looked intimidating, a large white tube with a narrow opening. "Have you ever had an MRI before?" asked the technician, a cheerful woman named Linda. I shook my head. "It's loud but completely painless," she assured me. "You'll need to lie very still for about 45 minutes. We'll give you earplugs and a call button in case you need anything." As I lay inside the machine, trying to ignore the claustrophobic feeling and the rhythmic thumping and banging sounds, I thought about all the years I'd lived with this pain. All the times I'd been told it was in my head, that I was exaggerating, that I should just toughen up. Whatever the MRI showed, at least it would be objective evidence, something no one could dismiss as dramatic or attention-seeking. A week later, I returned to Dr. Mitchell's office for the results. The moment she walked in, I knew something was wrong. Her previously relaxed demeanor had been replaced by a professional seriousness that made my stomach clench. "Amber," she said, sitting down and looking directly at me, "the MRI shows something concerning that I need to discuss with you." She turned her computer screen so I could see the images, though they meant nothing to my untrained eye, just grayscale shapes and shadows. Your arm shows evidence of multiple fractures, not just the one that was treated when you were 10, she explained, pointing to various spots on the screen. There's a healed fracture here in the ulna that appears never to have been treated at all. And here, she pointed to another area, there's evidence of a stress fracture in the humerus that's consistent with a twisting injury. I stared at the screen, trying to process what she was telling me. But I only broke my arm once, I said slowly. When I fell off the shed. Dr. Mitchell's expression was gentle but firm. These injuries are characteristic of what we call a non-accidental trauma pattern, she said carefully. In children, we typically see these patterns in cases of physical abuse. The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. But I wasn't abused, I protested automatically. I mean, my sister was mean to me, but… Amber, Dr. Mitchell interrupted softly. The injury pattern in your arm is not consistent with a single fall. There are multiple fractures that occurred at different times. Some of them show evidence of healing without proper medical treatment. I need to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to be honest with me. Was someone hurting you when you were a child? The directness of her question broke something loose inside me, a dam I hadn't even realized I'd built. 17 years of dismissed pain, of not being believed, of questioning my own experiences came flooding out all at once. My sister, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. She called it the falling game. She'd make me climb high places and then jump or fall. The shed was just the worst time, the time someone else finally noticed because it was too bad to hide. Dr. Mitchell handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently while I composed myself. She'd threaten me if I didn't do what she wanted. She'd push me off things, trip me, make me fall in ways that looked accidental. No one ever believed me when I tried to tell them. I told her everything, about Stephanie's manipulation, my parents' dismissal, the years of being labeled dramatic and attention-seeking. As I spoke, Dr. Mitchell took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening. When I finally fell silent, emotionally exhausted, she said, "Thank you for telling me this. It took a lot of courage." "Does it matter now?" I asked, wiping my eyes. It was so long ago. "It matters for several reasons," she replied. "First, for your treatment. Understanding the true nature of your injuries helps me provide better care. Second, for your healing, emotional as well as physical. And third," she hesitated slightly, "because I'm mandated by law to report suspected child abuse, even historical cases." "Report?" I echoed, a chill running through me. "To who?" "To the authorities," she explained gently. "The statute of limitations hasn't expired for what happened to you, Amber. What your sister did was criminal child abuse, and your parents' failure to protect you despite warning signs constitutes neglect." The room seemed to spin around me. All these years, I'd thought of what happened as Stephanie being cruel, as my parents being dismissive. I had never applied the words abuse or neglect to my experiences. "I'm going to ask Nathan, our social worker, to join us," Dr. Mitchell continued. "He can explain the reporting process and what happens next." Nathan was a calm, steadying presence who explained everything clearly. The report would go to both Child Protective Services. Even though I was now an adult, the report was about childhood abuse, and to the police. There would likely be an investigation. I might be asked to give a formal statement. "This is entirely your choice," Nathan emphasized. "We legally have to make the report, but you control how much you participate in any investigation. You can simply confirm the medical findings, or you can tell your full story, or anything in between." As I left the office that day, clutching referrals for both physical therapy and trauma counseling, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in years. The truth was finally coming to light. My body had kept the score all these years, preserving the evidence of what had been done to me. But now I had to decide how far I wanted to take this, how much of my past I was willing to excavate, and whether I was ready to confront the family that had failed me so completely. The MRI had revealed more than just the physical damage to my arm. It had exposed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 17 years, and there was no going back to the comfortable denial that had protected my family for so long. Detective Melissa Carter didn't look like the police officers I'd seen on television. There was nothing hardened or intimidating about her. She was a petite woman with curly brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in a simple blazer and slacks. Her office at the police station was surprisingly warm, with family photos on her desk and a small plant in the window. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Thompson," she said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from her. "I know this isn't easy." It had been 2 weeks since Dr. Mitchell made her report. I'd spent those weeks in a state of emotional turmoil, oscillating between determination to finally be heard and terror at the consequences of speaking up. I'd ultimately decided to cooperate fully with the investigation, a decision my new therapist, Dr. Rachel Barnes, had supported. "We'll go at your pace," Detective Carter assured me, setting up a digital recorder. "I need to record our conversation for the official record, but you can ask me to pause at any time if you need a break." She began with basic questions: my full name, date of birth, current address. Then she asked me to describe my childhood home life in general terms before moving specifically to the incidents with Stephanie. "When did the falling game begin?" she asked. "I was about 9 and Stephanie was 12, I replied. "It started with smaller things, pushing me off my bed, tripping me in the yard. Then it escalated. For the next 3 hours, I recounted every incident I could remember." Detective Carter took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about dates, locations, or who else might have been present. She showed particular interest in Stephanie's friends who had witnessed some incidents. Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy, I confirmed. They never participated, but they saw what was happening several times. "And your friend Kayla Wilson, you said? She witnessed some of your sister's behavior as well." I nodded. "Not the falling game specifically, but other things. Stephanie breaking my toys, threatening me, that sort of thing." When we reached the shed incident, Detective Carter asked me to describe it in minute detail: the threats Stephanie had used, the specific instructions she'd given me, my parents' reaction afterward, and the medical treatment I'd received. "Do you remember the name of the doctor who treated you?" she asked. "Dr. Morris," I replied. "I don't recall his first name." "We'll locate the medical records," she assured me. Dr. Mitchell has already provided her findings and assessment, but the original treatment records will be important evidence as well. The word evidence sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a conversation, it was the foundation for potential criminal charges against my own sister, possibly even my parents. "What exactly might happen to Stephanie?" I asked, my voice small. Despite everything, the prospect of legal consequences for my family filled me with conflicted emotions. "That will depend on what our investigation reveals and what the district attorney decides," Detective Carter explained. "Child abuse can be charged as a felony, especially when it results in serious physical injury. However, given the time that's passed and your current age, there are many factors to consider." She paused, studying my expression. "This isn't about revenge, Amber. It's about accountability and prevention. If your sister has children of her own someday, or works with children, this history is relevant." I hadn't even considered that angle. The thought of Stephanie having authority over other vulnerable children was deeply disturbing. Over the next several weeks, the investigation progressed. Detective Carter interviewed my parents, who initially denied everything. According to Kayla, who remained in touch with mutual friends from our hometown, my parents were telling everyone that I was making false accusations for attention, reverting to the same dismissive narrative they'd always used. Stephanie herself refused to speak with investigators without an attorney present. When she finally did give a statement, she categorically denied forcing me to climb the shed or creating any game that put me in danger. My sister was always attention-seeking and accident-prone, she reportedly told the detectives. I tried to look out for her, but she constantly put herself in dangerous situations despite my warnings. The case might have devolved into a he-said-she-said situation, with my word against my family's, if not for 3 crucial developments. First, Dr. Mitchell's medical evidence was unequivocal. The multiple healed fractures in my arm told a story that couldn't be explained away by a single fall or normal childhood accidents. 2 additional orthopedic specialists reviewed the MRI results and concurred with her assessment. Second, Detective Carter located Dr. Morris, now retired, who still remembered treating me. More importantly, he had made notes in my file about his suspicions of possible abuse, including, patient shows signs of fear when discussing accident. Story seems coached. Parents dismissive of injury severity. Consider follow-up for possible non-accidental trauma. He had apparently reported his concerns to child services at the time, but without more concrete evidence, no action had been taken. The third and most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Detective Carter had tracked down both Heather Jackson and Jessica Murphy. Heather, now married and living in another state, initially denied remembering anything significant. But Jessica, who had become an elementary school teacher, provided a detailed statement confirming much of what I'd described. I was always uncomfortable with how Stephanie treated Amber, her statement read. She was cruel in ways that went beyond normal sibling rivalry. I witnessed her forcing Amber to do dangerous things several times, threatening her if she didn't comply. I'm ashamed that I never spoke up, but I was just a kid myself and Stephanie could be intimidating. Even more surprisingly, my childhood friend Kayla had apparently kept a diary during our elementary school years. In it, she had documented multiple incidents she had witnessed, including specific dates and descriptions of Stephanie's behavior toward me. I was worried about Amber, but didn't know what to do, Kayla told the detectives. I tried telling my mom once, but she said it wasn't our place to interfere in another family. So I started writing everything down, thinking maybe someday it would help. Those contemporaneous accounts, written by a child with no motive to fabricate, proved to be compelling evidence. 6 weeks into the investigation, Detective Carter called to update me. The district attorney has reviewed all the evidence, she said. They've decided to pursue charges against your sister for child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury. They're still considering whether your parents' actions constitute criminal neglect or if they were simply misled by your sister. The news hit me with unexpected force. Part of me had never truly believed this would go beyond the investigation stage. Now it was real. Stephanie would face criminal charges for what she had done to me. What happens next? I asked, my mouth dry. She'll be formally charged and arraigned, Detective Carter explained. After that, there will either be a plea agreement or a trial. Given the evidence, her attorney will likely advise her to consider a plea. The following days brought a flurry of activity. The story somehow leaked to the local media in my hometown, resulting in headlines like, "Woman faces felony charges for childhood game that injured sister." My phone filled with messages from distant relatives and former classmates, some supportive, others accusatory. My parents finally called 3 days after Stephanie's arrest. I let the call go to voicemail, not yet ready to speak with them. My mother's message was tearful and confused. "Amber, please call us back. We don't understand what's happening. Stephanie says she never hurt you on purpose. Why are you doing this to our family?" Their persistent belief that I was the one causing harm, rather than the one who had been harmed, confirmed I had made the right choice in maintaining distance. The most surprising reaction came from my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who reached out via email. "I've always had concerns about how Stephanie treated you and how your parents handled it," he wrote. "There were times I witnessed interactions that troubled me, but when I tried to bring it up with your father, he became defensive. I regret not doing more. Please know that not everyone in the family is against you in this." His words provided unexpected validation. Perhaps there had been adults who had seen glimpses of the truth all along but, like so many, had chosen the easier path of not getting involved. 3 months after my initial MRI, Stephanie's attorney contacted the district attorney to discuss a plea agreement. She would plead guilty to a reduced charge of reckless endangerment of a child, accept 2 years of probation, undergo mandatory counseling, and agree to be placed on a registry that would prevent her from working with children. When Detective Carter called to inform me of the offer, she asked if I had any objections. "The alternative is a trial," she explained. "You would need to testify, which means being cross-examined by her attorney. It would be public and potentially traumatic. With a plea, there's a guaranteed consequence, albeit a lesser one." After discussing it with my therapist, I agreed to the plea arrangement. What I wanted most wasn't punishment, but acknowledgement. Official recognition that what happened to me was real, was wrong, and was not my fault. The day Stephanie stood before a judge and admitted guilt was the day I finally began to feel truly free. The secret that had defined my life for 17 years was a secret no longer. The truth had finally come to light, validated not just by my testimony, but by medical evidence, witness statements, and ultimately, by the legal system itself. As I left the courthouse that day, Detective Carter shook my hand. "It takes immense courage to speak truth to power," she said. "Especially when that power is your own family. You should be proud of yourself." I was proud, but more than that, I was relieved. The heavy burden of unacknowledged trauma that I'd carried for most of my life had finally been set down. I could now begin the real work of healing, not just my arm, but my heart and mind as well. The courthouse steps seemed an appropriate place for endings and beginnings. As I stood there after Stephanie's sentencing, watching her leave with her attorney, I felt neither triumph nor vengeance, just a profound sense of closure. The legal battle was over, but my journey toward healing was just beginning. Stephanie had accepted the plea deal, formally admitting to reckless endangerment of a child. During the brief hearing, she had made a statement that stopped short of a full apology. "I recognize that my actions as a child caused harm," she'd said, her voice carefully controlled. "I never intended the consequences to be so severe or long-lasting." It wasn't the acknowledgement I might have hoped for, but it was more than I ever expected to receive. My parents sat behind her in the courtroom, their faces drawn and pale. They didn't look at me. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter from my mother. Unlike her previous communications, which had been full of denial and emotional manipulation, this one showed the first glimmers of recognition. "I don't know how to begin," she wrote. "The evidence the police showed us, the medical reports, Kayla's diary entries, they've forced your father and me to confront things we should have seen years ago. We failed you, Amber. We chose the easier explanation rather than looking deeper when you tried to tell us something was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just letting you know that we finally believe you. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A crack in the wall of denial that had surrounded my family for decades. My therapist, Dr. Rachel Barnes, helped me process these complex emotions, the validation that came too late, the grief for the childhood protection I never received, the tentative hope that perhaps someday, some form of relationship with my parents might be possible. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Barnes reminded me during one particularly difficult session. You'll have days when it feels like you're moving backward. That's normal and expected. Her guidance was invaluable as I worked through the layers of trauma that the investigation had uncovered. We used EMDR therapy to process the most painful memories, gradually reducing their emotional charge. We explored the ways my childhood experiences had shaped my adult relationships, my tendency toward people-pleasing, my difficulty trusting others. You developed these patterns as survival mechanisms, she explained. They protected you when you were vulnerable. Now you can thank them for their service and develop new patterns that serve your adult life better. The physical healing progressed alongside the emotional. Tyler, my physical therapist, developed a specialized program to address the long-term damage to my arm. The pain that had been my constant companion for 17 years began to diminish as we worked to strengthen the surrounding muscles and improve mobility. Your body has been compensating for these old injuries for a long time, Tyler explained during one session. We're essentially retraining it to move in healthier patterns. 6 months after the court case concluded, I received an unexpected message from Kayla, who had moved back to our hometown after college. I'm in the city for the weekend. Would you like to meet for coffee? Her text read. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. The years melted away as we hugged, this person who had witnessed the truth of my childhood and had, in her own way, preserved it in her diary entries. I should have done more, she said as we settled at a corner table. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. You were just a kid yourself, I reminded her. And in the end, your diary made all the difference. You did help, just not in the way either of us could have imagined back then. Our reconnection became a regular thing. We met monthly for coffee or lunch, rebuilding a friendship that had been interrupted by time and distance. Through Kayla, I learned that my parents had become more withdrawn in the community, that Stephanie and her fiancé had postponed their wedding indefinitely, that the story had rippled through our hometown in ways both predictable and surprising. Some people still think you're making it up for attention, she told me honestly. But others have come forward with their own stories about Stephanie, things she did in high school and college that follow the same pattern. You speaking up has given others permission to do the same. The idea that my story might help others recognize and escape abusive situations became a powerful motivator. A year after the investigation began, I was invited to speak at a conference for school counselors about recognizing signs of sibling abuse. Standing at the podium, sharing my experience with professionals who could make a difference in children's lives, I felt a sense of purpose emerging from the pain. Sibling abuse is often dismissed as normal rivalry, I told the audience. But there's a clear line between typical sibling conflict and systematic abuse of power. Learning to recognize that line could save a child from years of trauma. The presentation led to others, and gradually I found myself becoming an advocate. I volunteered with a local child abuse prevention organization, helped develop educational materials for parents and teachers, and eventually joined their board of directors. My personal life transformed as well. The hypervigilance that had characterized my earlier relationships began to fade as I practiced vulnerability with safe people. I learned to recognize red flags early, to set and maintain boundaries, to trust my own perceptions rather than allowing others to define my reality. 2 years after the MRI that changed everything, I received a formal letter of apology from my parents. It acknowledged specific incidents they had dismissed, expressed genuine remorse for their failure to protect me, and respected my need for distance without demanding forgiveness or reconciliation. It felt like the first honest communication we'd ever had. I replied with a brief note of my own. Thank you for your apology. I'm not ready for more contact right now, but I appreciate your respect for my boundaries and your willingness to acknowledge the past. It was a small step, but an important one. The door wasn't closed forever, just for now. The chronic pain in my arm, while not completely gone, had diminished to a manageable level. The physical therapy had helped, but so had the emotional healing. As Dr. Mitchell had suspected, the two were inextricably linked. As the psychological burden lifted, the physical symptoms improved as well. On the 3rd anniversary of my MRI revelation, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on how far I'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been days of doubt, nights of tears, moments when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But there had also been breakthroughs, victories, and a growing sense of peace that I had never thought possible. I opened my journal, not the childhood diary that Stephanie had used against me, but a new one, filled with adult reflections rather than childish fears. I wrote, 3 years ago today, an MRI machine revealed what my body had known all along. That what happened to me was real, was serious, and was not my fault. The journey since then has been the hardest and most healing of my life. I've learned that truth, even delayed by 17 years, still has power. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but integrating the past into a stronger present. Most importantly, I've learned that my voice matters not just for myself, but for others who might still be silent, waiting for permission to speak their own truths. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the city lights. The pain in my arm gave a familiar twinge, but it no longer defined me. It was just one part of a story that continued to unfold, a story that now included not just survival, but growth, purpose, and hope. If you've stayed with me through this difficult story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your willingness to witness another person's truth is more powerful than you might realize. If anything in my experience resonated with your own, please know you're not alone. Child abuse, especially sibling abuse, often goes unrecognized and unaddressed, but healing is possible at any age. I'd love to know if my story has impacted you in any way. Have you ever had an experience where you weren't believed about something important? Or have you witnessed something concerning but weren't sure how to help? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to my channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Together, we can break the silence that allows abuse to continue. Remember, your story matters too, and there are people ready to listen when you're ready to speak. Thank you for being part of my healing journey.